Welcome to Omni Wizard. Today's adventure: what if Harry Potter had Professor X's mind powers and the X-Women couldn't resist him? If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The quietest room in the world. There is a particular kind of silence that belongs to government buildings on a Tuesday afternoon, and Harry Potter had come to think of it as the only thing he was truly good at producing anymore. He sat at a desk on the third floor of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, in a cubicle that someone had decided to decorate with a fern, and he watched the fern not die. That was the whole of the afternoon's drama. The fern had been a gift from Hermione, who believed, with the patient ferocity of a woman who had survived a war and decided the next project was Harry, that a living thing on the desk would help. It had not helped. But it had not died either, which Harry privately considered a draw, and he was no longer in a position to be choosy about his victories. The form in front of him concerned the proper containment of a Class 3 dark artifact recovered from a manor in Wiltshire. He had filled in his name. He had filled in the date. He had reached the box marked recommended disposition, and found, as he found most days now, that the part of him that used to have opinions about how the world should be ordered had gone somewhere quiet and not left a forwarding address. 3 years since the war. Long enough that people had stopped looking at him as though he might detonate, and started looking at him like he might be useful, which was worse. The boy who lived had become the man who signed off on artifact disposals, and nobody, least of all Harry, was entirely sure how that had happened, except that surviving turned out to be a thing you had to keep doing every single day, and the doing of it ate the hours one form at a time. He wrote in the box, contained and warded pending review, and he meant it the way you mean anything when the meaning has worn smooth. The thing about a quiet mind, Harry would think later, was that you only noticed how quiet it had been once it stopped. At 3:47 in the afternoon, by the clock that ran backward on Tuesdays because no one had been able to fix it, a junior clerk named Pevensey stuck his head over the partition and said the Auror office wanted a second wand on a pickup in Diagon, low priority, probably nothing, and would Harry mind? Harry would not mind. Harry would, in fact, have walked into the Atlantic if it meant not finishing the form. He stood, took his coat, and went. Diagon Alley in the late afternoon had the bruised gold light of a place that had been beautiful before the war and was teaching itself to be beautiful again, more carefully this time. The pickup was at the apothecary 3 doors down from the wrecked shell of what had been Ollivander's, a confiscation. Someone had been selling powdered alchemy shell to people who shouldn't have it, and the Auror on scene, a square woman named Trabb, wanted a witness with a recognizable face so the paperwork would survive a hearing. "You're the recognizable face," Trabb told him not unkindly. "It's all you're here for, stand there and be recognizable." So Harry stood and was recognizable, which he had a great deal of practice at, and he watched the apothecary's owner protest his innocence in the elaborate, doomed way of a man who knew he was guilty and hoped volume might substitute for fact. The street had the usual 3:30 crowd. A woman with 2 children, an old wizard arguing with a fruit stall, a boy maybe 6 crouched at the gutter with a folded paper boat, waiting for water that wasn't coming. Harry noticed the boy because he had started, lately, noticing children. He didn't examine why. The why was a room he kept the door shut on. He did not notice the 3 men until the first of them said his name, Potter. It is a strange thing to hear your own name and know, before you have finished turning, that the person saying it intends to kill you. There is a frequency to it. Harry had learned that frequency at 17 and had hoped, the way you hope about a language you no longer want to speak, that he had forgotten it. He had not. His body turned and his wand was in his hand before the thought caught up, and the thought, when it arrived, was almost bored. Oh, this again. 3 men. Old robes, the dark green of a faction that had lost and refused to know it. The one in front had a face Harry half recognized from a wanted poster he'd signed. A younger cousin of someone who had died at the ministry, carrying his grief the way they all carried it, sharpened into a reason. His wand was already up. The word was already in his mouth. "Avada," Trabb shouted. The crowd, which had been a crowd, became physics, bodies turning the wrong way, colliding, a fruit stall going over, the woman grabbing for her children and getting only one. The green light of the curse was the most honest color in the world. It did not care who it was pointed at. It started toward Harry and Harry moved, and the curse missing him kept going because killing curses do not stop when they miss. They go until they find something. What they found was the gutter, the paper boat, the boy. Harry would spend a long time afterward trying to describe the next part to people who had not been inside it, and he would never get it right because the language for it did not exist, because the thing that happened had not happened to a person before. He saw the curse on its line. He saw the boy at the end of the line, 6 years old, still waiting for water. And the distance between them was 4 meters, and the curse was faster than any spell he could throw across 4 meters. And Harry, who had spent 3 years learning that there was nothing left in him that could move the world, reached for the boy with a part of himself he did not know he had. The way you reach in a dream and find your arm is longer than your arm. The curse stopped. It hung in the air a hand's width from the boy's cheek, a knot of green light that had forgotten how to travel, and it was not Harry's wand that held it, because his wand was pointed the other way entirely, at the man who'd cast it. It was the longer arm. It was the part of himself that had no name yet. He held the curse the way you hold a thought you don't want to finish, and then, because a held thought has to go somewhere, he turned his hand and threw it up, into the empty air above the rooftops, where it broke against the late gold light and was gone. And then every mind on Diagon Alley arrived inside his skull at the same time. There is no good comparison, but the closest is this. Imagine you have lived your whole life in a house, and you have always believed the house was the world, and then one day a wall you didn't know was a wall comes down, and on the other side of it is not another room but the sea, the entire sea, every wave at once, and it has been there the whole time pressing, and you simply could not hear it. Harry heard it now. Trabb's mind, a flat gray readiness gone suddenly sharp with fear, fear for him, fear of him. The apothecary owner's mind, a slick eel of self-interest, already composing the version of events that left him blameless. The boy's mind, which was not even afraid, which had not understood that it had nearly stopped, which was thinking about the boat. The woman with the children, the old wizard, the three killers, and the front one's mind was the loudest because it was the most surprised, a roar of how, that's not, he didn't even, 1,000 thoughts and then not 1,000. The wall was not a single wall. Past it was another, and past that another, and Harry felt his attention falling outward through them like a stone through floors, the street, the alley, the city beyond London, 8 million minds. Each one a window with the light on, and the windows did not stop at London. They went gray and small toward a horizon that was not a horizon because the world is round and the minds went all the way around it. And the noise was going to kill him. He understood that with the clarity of a man watching his own hand on a stove. This was not a metaphor. The human skull was not built to hold the inside of every other skull, and his was filling. And when it was full, it would not stop filling, and the part of him that had thrown a killing curse into the sky was now the only thing standing between him and a death by simple volume, and it was not enough. It was a hand cupped against the sea, then something in the sea turned toward him. Not a thought, a presence. It came from very far away, west and over water, and it moved through the ocean of minds the way a lighthouse beam moves through fog, deliberate, practiced, unhurried in a way that was its own kind of mercy. It found him drowning, and it did not grab him. That was the thing Harry would remember. It did not grab. It built around his foundering attention a shape, a quiet, a single still room in the middle of the roar, walls he could feel going up brick by brick, and a voice, if you could call it a voice, that was the first other voice he had ever heard speak directly into the middle of his own thinking without a mouth. Breathe, you are not lost. Pull yourself to the sound of my voice and breathe. Harry pulled. He had no idea how. The instructions were not in words. The words were a courtesy laid over something older, a hand held out in the dark that you grip before you've decided to. He pulled, and the sea did not vanish, but it receded behind the walls of the still room, until it was a pressure against the windows and not a flood through the door, and Harry found that he was on his knees on the cobbles of Diagon Alley with his wand still in his hand and Trabb shouting his name from very close and very far at once. The presence stayed a moment longer. It had the texture of enormous patience worn by enormous tiredness. Around it, Harry could feel the edges of a mind so disciplined it was almost a cathedral, vast rooms kept in perfect order, and under the order, carefully shelved, an old grief Harry recognized because it was shaped like his own. You are new, the presence said, and there was something in it that might have been wonder, the wonder of an old astronomer who has watched the same sky for 50 years and seen tonight a star that was not there yesterday. You are very new and you are very loud, and you have just done something that should not be possible for someone untrained. We need to talk, you and I, but not now. Now you will close the windows. I will show you the latch. Then you will let go of me because I am holding a great many things tonight and you are the heaviest. I'm sorry, Harry thought, and did not know he had aimed the thought until he felt it land. Don't be, said the presence, dry now, almost amused, the amusement of a man who had heard every apology in the world and found this one unexpectedly to his taste. Sorry is a luxury for people who had a choice. Here, the latch is here, and it showed him. He came back to the street the way you come back to a room after fainting, in pieces and out of order. The cobbles first, cold through his trousers. Then Trabb's hand on his shoulder, gripping hard enough to bruise her face a hand's width from his, asking him questions he could see her asking before he could hear them, which was wrong, which was a new wrongness he filed in a place he would have to deal with later. Then the boy, the boat boy, standing over him now with the unbothered curiosity of the very young, holding out the paper boat as though Harry might want it, like it was the obvious medicine. You fell down, the boy informed him. I did, Harry agreed. His voice came out rough. Bit of a day. Behind the boy, the three killers were on the ground, not dead. Harry checked, and the checking was instant now, a glance that went through skin, 3 knots of stunned, furious, intact consciousness, and he had not done it on purpose, the checking, which frightened him more than the fall had. The men were down because Trabb and a second Auror had dropped them in the chaos, and they were trussed in conjured cord, and the front one, the one with the borrowed grief, was staring at Harry with an expression that had passed all the way through hatred and come out the far side into something closer to religious terror. "What are you?" the man said. It was not a question. It was an accusation, and under it, naked, where Harry could not help but hear it, was the man's actual thought, the one beneath the words. He caught it. He caught the curse with his hand. "Men don't. Men can't. I'm the recognizable face," Harry said. "Apparently I do more than I advertised." He got up. The street rearranged itself around him in a wide, instinctive circle, the crowd performing the ancient arithmetic of a thing it had seen but not understood. And Harry stood in the center of the circle as he had stood in the center of so many circles, and he understood that something had changed that could not be changed back, and he was too tired in that moment to feel anything about it except a vast and specific desire to lie down. He did not lie down. He helped Trabb with the paperwork. The recognizable face had its uses. The department's healers found nothing wrong with him, which was its own diagnosis. They scanned for curse damage, for legilimency intrusion, for the 11 varieties of magical exhaustion in the standard text, and they came back baffled and a little affronted, the way experts get when a body refuses to misbehave in a recognized way. Harry sat on the cot and did not tell them that he could hear, faintly, through the still-room walls the presence had taught him to build, the healer on his left composing a grocery list, and the one on his right worrying about a debt, and a man 2 rooms over reciting the Chudley canons, starting lineup to keep from thinking about his own diagnosis. He did not tell them because there were no words that would not end with him in a different kind of room, and because the latch held, and the holding of it was the only work he had done in 3 years that felt like work worth doing, and he was not going to let a grocery list undo it. Hermione arrived at 6:30 with Ron a step behind her, both of them wearing the careful faces of people who had been told only that there had been an incident and Harry was involved. Harry watched them come down the corridor and did something he had promised the presence somewhere in the still room that he would not do without asking. He did not ask. He could not help it. The door of the latch was new and the hinges were loose. He heard Hermione's mind before she reached the cot, and it was not a sentence, it was a chord, all of it at once. "Please be all right, and what did they not tell me in 3 years? 3 years and he still won't end the war. The war keeps not being over for him, and I should have made him take the leave, and underneath all of it, steady, a bass note that did not waver, love, the plain unglamorous load-bearing kind, the kind that shows up at 6:30 on a Tuesday." Harry shut the latch so hard his teeth clicked. "I'm fine," he said, before either of them could ask. "I'm actually fine, which is the strange part." "Sit down before you fall down, you look worse than I do." Ron sat. Hermione did not. She stood at the foot of the cot with her arms crossed in the particular configuration that meant she had already read every word of the incident report and found it wanting. "They're saying you stopped a killing curse," she said. "Without your wand, they're saying you threw it." "Harry, that isn't, the killing curse can't be stopped. That's the entire defining property of the killing curse. It's in the name. It's the thing that makes it unforgivable. You can't block it, and you certainly can't catch it and hold it and throw it into the sky like a cricket ball," Ron supplied, who had clearly heard the same description and been unable to let it go. "Like a cricket ball," Hermione said with loathing. "So either every authority on theoretical magic for 400 years is wrong, or you did something that wasn't magic. And I would like to know which, because those are both terrifying and I prefer my terror specific." Harry looked at his oldest friends, and he weighed, in the new and frightening way he could now weigh such things, exactly how much to say. He could feel the shapes of their fear, Hermione's a thing of categories breached, Ron's simpler and worse, the old animal dread of a friend becoming a stranger. He owed them the truth. He also owed them the chance to sleep tonight. "It wasn't magic," he said, "not the kind we learned. There's a man, he spoke to me, after from a long way off inside my head, and he was kind about it, which is how I know he's done it before and he's good at it, and he's not Voldemort, because Voldemort was never once kind by accident." He turned his hands over and looked at the palms, ordinary palms that had held a death, and let it go. "I think I'm something new, Hermione, or something old that nobody filed under magic. And I think it's been in me the whole time, and today it woke up because a kid was about to die, and now I can hear." He stopped. "Hear what?" Hermione said, very quietly. "Everything," Harry said. "Everyone, I can hear you. I'm trying very hard not to. There's a latch." He showed me a latch, "but I can hear you, both of you right now, the way you can hear a radio in the next room. And I want to be completely clear that I am not going to listen on purpose, because the alternative to that promise is a version of me that I would not want either of you in a room with. The corridor was quiet. The Chudley Cannon's man 2 rooms over had reached the reserve keeper. Ron said slowly, "Can you hear what I'm thinking right now?" "You're thinking, prove it," Harry said. "And under that you're thinking that if I can do this, then the war really is never going to leave me alone. It's just going to keep finding new ways to be the war. And under that you're thinking about whether you should be scared of me." He met Ron's eyes. "You shouldn't, but I'm not going to tell you that you shouldn't and then make you believe it. That's the entire point, Ron. The difference between me and the thing I could be is that I let you decide what to think about me with your own head." Ron was quiet for a moment. Then, because he was Ron, and because 11 years of friendship had taught him exactly where the pressure valve was, "You're going to be absolutely unbearable at chess." The laugh came out of Harry before he had cleared it for departure, and it hurt in a good way, like blood coming back into a limb. "I'm not going to read your chess. I have standards. You're going to read my chess. I'm going to win at chess without reading it, which is worse, and you know it." Hermione had not laughed. Hermione was watching him with the expression she wore when a problem had become large enough to deserve her, and Harry watched the fear in her reorganize itself, brick by brick, into a project, and felt something in his chest unclench by a degree. She had decided he was a thing to be helped rather than a thing to be feared. With Hermione, that distinction was load-bearing. "This man," she said, "the one who spoke to you, did he give you a name?" "He gave me a latch and told me to close the windows," Harry said. "Names came second, but yes, after." When the street had cleared and Trabb had stopped shouting, he came back, just for a moment, the way you put your head round a door to check a kettle. He said his name was Charles Xavier. He said he runs a school. He said, Harry stopped because the next part was the part he had not let himself look at directly, the way you don't look at the sun. He said there are others, not wizards. People who woke up like I did, except they woke up at 12, at 15, alone, with no latch and no kind voice across the water, and most of them thought they were going mad, and some of them were right. He said the world has a name for us now, and the name is not a kind one, and the people who use it are building things to hunt us with. And he said I should come and learn what I am before someone else teaches me, because, and this is the part I keep turning over, he said a power like mine, untrained, is not a danger to me. It's a danger to everyone, and he would rather I learn the danger from a friend. "And you believe him," Hermione said, not skeptical, testing. "I felt him," Harry said. "That's the thing I can't make you understand because you've never done it. When he was in my head, I could feel the whole shape of him, the way you feel a room in the dark. He's tired and he's brilliant, and he's done at least one thing he can't forgive himself for, and he is, underneath all of it, trying, properly trying, the boring, exhausting way, every day, the way you two do." He looked between them. "I've spent 3 years signing forms because I couldn't find a single thing worth the size of what I am. And today a man on the other side of an ocean reached across it to keep a stranger from dying of his own head and asked nothing and let go the second he was sure I could stand. I'd like to find out how a person learns to be that." Hermione's arms came uncrossed. That was her surrender when it came. She did not say it, she enacted it. "Then we'll find out everything about him before you go," she said. "I'll start tonight. Schools, charters, who funds him, what the Americans Congress has said about, what did you say they're called?" "Mutants," Harry said. The word still fit strangely in his mouth. "We're called mutants." "Mutants," Hermione repeated, already filing it, already building the project around it, and the relief of being, for one evening, a problem his best friend wanted to solve rather than a hero everyone wanted to spend, was so large that Harry had to look at the fernless ceiling for a moment until his eyes behaved. They released him at 8. He did not apparate home. He walked because the flat in Islington was 40 minutes on foot through the Muggle city, and because he wanted to find out what the new thing in his head did to a crowd when no one was trying to kill anyone. It was worse than the hospital and better than the street. The latch held, that was the discovery that mattered. London at 8 on a Tuesday was 3 million minds layered like sediment, and Harry walked through them with the door of his attention shut to a hairline, and the sediment stayed sediment, a low warm hum he could feel against the walls Xavier had taught him without ever once falling through them. He could choose. That was the whole of it, and the whole of it was everything. He could keep the windows shut and walk down a Muggle high street like a man and not a receiver, and the keeping shut was effort, the way holding your breath is effort, but it was effort he could sustain, and the sustaining of it felt, after 3 years of feeling nothing he respected, like the first honest muscle he had used in a long while. But the windows wanted to open. That was the thing nobody had warned him about, because nobody had been here to warn him. A mind that could hear was a mind that leaned toward hearing the way a plant leans at a window. And the leaning was not malice, it was nature, and Harry understood, somewhere around Pentonville Road, that the danger Xavier had named so carefully was not that he would decide to misuse this. The danger was that misusing it would not feel like a decision. It would feel like relaxing. He tested himself at a bus stop on purpose, the way you press a bruise to learn its edges. A young man stood at the shelter arguing into a phone, and his words were ordinary and false. "I'm 5 minutes away. I'm literally just round the corner," and behind the words, leaking through the hairline gap Harry allowed himself, was the truth that the young man had not left the pub, that he was 3 pints in and frightened of the person on the other end. Frightened in the specific way of someone who keeps choosing badly and keeps lying about it because the lie is the only part he can control. It would have been the easiest thing in the world for Harry to widen the gap, to know the whole of him, to know whether the fear was the redeemable kind. The man was a stranger. He would never know he had been read. There was no victim, no cost, no one to answer to. Harry closed the gap to nothing and walked on, and his hands were not quite steady, and he understood that this was the test, this exactly the one with no consequences, the one where the only thing watching was the version of himself he wanted to be able to live with. There would be louder versions of it later. There would be the version where reading a mind saved a life, and the version where it stopped a war, and the version where everyone he loved begged him to. But it started here at a bus stop in the rain with a frightened liar who would never know, and if Harry could not hold the line for a stranger who would never know, he had no business pretending he would hold it for anyone. He held it. It cost him in a coin he did not have a name for yet, and he paid it, and he kept walking north through the leaning, hungry, beautiful dark of 3,000,000 private rooms, and not one of them did he enter uninvited, and the not entering was the loudest thing he did all day. By the time he reached Islington, he had a rule fully formed, the way the disposition on the artifact form had never come. The door opens from the inside, always. He did not phrase it grandly. He phrased it the way you phrase a thing you intend to keep, short and load-bearing, and his. Voldemort came back that night, which Harry supposed was the universe's idea of comic timing, not all of Voldemort. There was not enough of him left in the world for all, but there had been, the Aurors would later determine, a fragment. Not a Horcrux, those were accounted for, but a residue, a smear of intention soaked into an object that one of the 3 Diagon killers had been carrying, a fingerbone in a velvet bag, a relic of the kind the diehards traded among themselves like saints' teeth, believing that proximity to the Dark Lord's dust might confer a portion of his ruin. The killers had carried it for luck. It had, in the way of all such relics, been waiting. It found Harry at 2 in the morning in the flat in Islington he kept and did not love, while he lay awake practicing the latch, open a finger's width, hear the city breathe, close it again, building the muscle the way Xavier had shown him without showing him. He felt the residue arrive the way you feel a draft from a door you thought was shut, a coldness that had a shape. The shape was a memory of a face that had no nose, and it came in through the dark of the flat looking for purchase, looking for the old familiar handhold, the scar, the connection that had run between them for 16 years and been severed in a forest in 1998, and it found the scar, and it found behind the scar the door of Harry's mind standing, to the residue's evident astonishment, wide open. The fragment of Voldemort, which had been a legilimens of legendary cruelty, surged through the open door expecting a fight, expecting the boys' clumsy walls, the panic, the leverage, the soft places. It expected, in short, a mind it could enter. What it got was Harry, who had spent the evening learning that his own head was now the size of a country, turning around inside the doorway with the unhurried attention of a man who has heard a mosquito. "Oh," Harry said out loud to the empty flat, "it's you. I wondered if there'd be a bit of you left over. There usually is with people like you. You hoard yourselves." The residue tried to coil into him, tried the old tricks, the images of the dead, the whispered offers, the show me your fear, I will make it a kingdom. 3 years ago it might have cost Harry a sleepless week. Tonight he could see the whole of it at once, as he had seen the whole of Hermione, except that where Hermione had been a chord, this was a single note held too long until it had soured, a thing that had wanted to be enormous and had only ever managed to be empty, an appetite that had mistaken itself for a will. There was a moment. Harry was honest with himself about it afterward, because honesty about the moments like this was going to be the only thing that kept him from becoming the thing he was afraid of. There was a moment when he could have done something elegant and terrible. He could have reached into the residue and unmade it from the inside, turned its own architecture against it, given it back every cruelty it had ever authored at once. He had the room in him to do it now. He could feel the size of the cruelty available to him, sitting in the new vast spaces of his mind like a tool left out on a bench. He did not pick up the tool. Instead, he did the boring, exhausting, proper thing. He gathered the residue the way you gather spilled water, without anger, without flourish, with a kind of janitorial patience, and he held it cupped in the same longer arm that had caught the curse on Diagon Alley, and he looked at it, this last loud scrap of the man who had defined the first 17 years of his life, and he found that he felt almost nothing. Not triumph, not even hatred, which had at least been a relationship. Just the mild distaste of a man cleaning up after a party that ended years ago. You spent your whole existence trying to get inside other people, Harry told it, and you never once understood that the door only matters if they leave it open for you. Nobody ever did, not even your own people. They worshipped you with the door barred. He closed his hand. Goodbye, Tom. You were never as interesting as the rest of you was scared. He unmade the residue. Not with cruelty, just with closure, the way you snuff a candle that's guttering anyway. And the cold went out of the flat, and the draft stopped, and the city breathed on outside the window, 8 million latched and unlatched doors, and Harry lay back down and discovered that the great enemy of his childhood had become, in the end, a piece of late-night admin. He was not sure what to do with that. He decided, in lieu of feeling it, to file it next to the cricket ball. In a study in Westchester County, New York, a man in a wheelchair sat very still in the dark and felt 4,000 miles away. A flicker of psychic violence flare and die in under 3 seconds, clean as a struck match. And Charles Xavier set down his tea and said to no one, "Oh my, he's quick, isn't he?" And then after a moment, with the particular weariness of a man who had spent his life recognizing the size of new things, "He's going to need us. The fast ones always need us most." He came back to Harry an hour before dawn, while Harry sat at the window of the Islington flat with a cup of tea gone cold, watching the city's minds dim towards sleep one window at a time. The knock this time Harry recognized. He had felt its shape on Diagon Alley, the deliberate lighthouse sweep, and he opened the door of himself before Xavier had finished asking. "I hope I'm not intruding," Xavier said, and there was real apology in it, the apology of a man who knew precisely how much an intrusion into a telepath's mind could cost and never made one carelessly. "I felt you settle something tonight. I wanted to be sure it stayed settled. It was a leftover," Harry thought back. "Of someone I used to be afraid of. It turns out I'm not anymore. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about that. You'll have time to decide," Xavier said. "That's most of what I offer in the end. Time and the company of people who won't make you decide alone." There was a pause, and in it Harry felt the older man choose his next words the way a surgeon chooses where to cut. "May I tell you something I don't tell new arrivals until later? You've earned it early, I think, by what you didn't do tonight. I felt that too. You had a tool in your hand and you set it down." "Tell me," Harry thought. "I have not always set it down." Xavier's mind did not flinch from the admission, which was how Harry knew it was true and old and carried daily. "I have reached into minds I had no right to enter because I judged the stakes too high to ask. Each time I was certain I was the exception. Each time I was wrong in a way I only understood years later, when the person I'd reshaped looked at me, and I saw that I had taken something from them that they would never know to miss. I built my school so that there would be a place in the world where power like ours was taught, the one thing the world never teaches the powerful, which is restraint, the unglamorous discipline of the closed door. And I built it, if I'm honest, as penance." He let Harry feel the whole weight of it for a moment, the cathedral mind and the cracked stone in its foundation. "I tell you this because you are stronger than I am, Harry. I felt the size of you on that street. You touched the whole world for 3 seconds and it did not break you. That means the day will come when you can do what I only fear I could, at a scale I cannot. And on that day, the only thing standing between you and a great and well-intentioned atrocity will be a rule you made when no one was watching." "I made one tonight," Harry thought, "at a bus stop. The door opens from the inside." He felt Xavier go still, the particular stillness of a teacher who has just heard a student say, unprompted, the thing it takes most of them a decade to learn. "Then come and teach it to my children," Xavier said at last, and the dryness was back, and under it something that was almost hope, which on a mind that tired was a kind of courage. Because there are people building machines to hunt us, and the machines do not have doors, and the men who build them sleep soundly because they have told themselves we are the dangerous ones. I should like, before I die, to put into the world a single mutant of overwhelming power, whom the frightened cannot honestly call a monster. You may be the first one I have met who could survive the job. No promises, Harry thought, but I'm coming to look. That is all I ever ask, said Charles Xavier, and withdrew the way the tide withdraws, leaving the beach rearranged and the sound of itself still in your ears. The X-jet, when it came, did not come the way Harry expected, which was loudly in the night, scattering muggles. It came the way Xavier did everything, which was with permission. A woman's voice reached Harry first, 2 days later, while he was packing a bag he kept telling himself was small. A warm voice, amused and steady, arriving not through the air but through the same channel Xavier had used, except gentler, knocking before it entered, a courtesy that Harry felt and was absurdly moved by. "May I?" the voice asked, "just to talk." "The professor said you'd appreciate being asked." Harry set down the shirt he was folding. Yes, he thought carefully, aiming it with the care he was still learning. You may, thank you. The voice came the rest of the way in, and it was like a door opening onto a kitchen somewhere with good light. My name's Jean Grey. I'll be flying you out if you still want to come. The professor wanted me to tell you that nothing's been decided. You can fly to Westchester and have dinner and look at the place and fly home again, and the offer stands either way, and nobody will read you and nobody will keep you. He was very insistent, I say that part. He says new telepaths arrive braced for a cage, and he'd like you to arrive knowing the door S on your side of the wall. Harry stood in his unloved flat holding a half-folded shirt and felt the first thing he had felt in 3 years that was not a duty. He didn't have a name for it. He promised himself he'd only name one feeling at a time, and he wasn't ready to spend the name on this one yet, in case it didn't last. But it sat in his chest where the smooth, worn nothing had been, and it had the shape of a door being held open by someone on the other side, and Harry, who had spent so long being the recognizable face in the center of the circle, found that he wanted very badly to walk through it. Tell the professor I'm coming, he thought, and Jean, thank you for knocking. He felt her smile. It came down the channel like sun through a window. Welcome aboard, Harry, she said. We've been wondering when you'd turn up. The world's about to get very loud. It'll be nice to have someone in it who knows how to keep a door. The channel closed gently on her side, the way a considerate guest closes a door behind them. Harry finished folding the shirt. He looked around the flat at the small gray life he had been not living. The unread post, the unwatered absence of a fern, the desk where the form about the Class 3 artifact still waited for a disposition he was never going to provide. And he found that he was, against all the evidence of the last 3 years, smiling, the plain, unguarded way he hadn't since before the war taught him what his face was worth. Somewhere west, over a great deal of water, a school full of frightened, gifted, hunted people was learning to keep their doors. And a man in a chair, the kindest, powerful person Harry had ever felt, was building, brick by patient brick, a place where the loudest thing about you didn't have to be the most dangerous. Harry shouldered the small bag, turned off the lights he wouldn't miss, and went to learn how to be the size he was. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, Cerebro Etiquette. The mansion came up out of the green of upstate New York the way money does, which is to say quietly, as if the trees themselves had been asked to keep the secret and agreed. Harry watched it grow under the jet's wing and ran the only calculation he could not stop running anymore, the one that came unbidden every time he met a new place full of new people. How many minds, how loud, how close. 41 in the main house, more in the grounds. He knew this without trying, the way you know how cold a room is the moment you enter it, and he hated knowing it, and he kept the latch shut so that knowing the number was all he took. The number was free. The number leaked through the walls like temperature. Anything past the number, he had decided in a flat in Islington, required a knock. You're doing the thing, Jean said from the pilot's seat without turning around. What thing? The counting. She brought the jet down through a hatch that opened in the basketball court, which was the single most American sentence Harry's life had yet contained. Everybody who walks in the door does it, the strong ones anyway. The professor calls it the first reflex. You learn how many people are in a building before you learn their names, because for a while the number is the only thing that can hurt you. The jet settled. She finally looked back at him, and her face was the face that went with the kitchen with good light voice, open and tired in a way she was not trying to hide. It gets quieter, not the world, you. You get quieter and then the number stops being the loudest thing. Is that a promise or a recruitment pitch? With us those are usually the same thing, Jean said and stood, and the hatch above them sealed away the sky. He had braced for a cage. Xavier had warned her to tell him there wasn't one, which Harry had filed as the sort of thing people say precisely because there is a cage. He'd been wrong. The lower levels of the mansion were a cathedral of function, blast doors, and reinforced corridors, the architecture of people who had been attacked and intended to survive being attacked again. But the upper house, when Jean walked him up into it, was a school. Worn banisters. A notice board with a flyer for a bake sale, half covering a flyer about a lost cat. Somewhere a piano being practiced badly and with great commitment. The smell of 100 breakfasts soaked into old wood. Children's voices arguing about whether flight counted as cheating in tag, which Harry gathered was a live and bitter jurisprudential question in a house where some of the children could fly. It undid something in him, the ordinariness of it. He had expected an institution. He had been handed a home that happened to be fortified, and the order of those two facts mattered, and he understood that Xavier had built it in exactly that order on purpose, the way you build anything you mean to last. The love first, then the walls around the love. He's in the study, Jean said. He'll want to see you before the grand tour. Fair warning, he'll offer you tea and pretend it's a small thing, and it isn't, it's the whole interview. What you do with the tea is the interview. What's the right answer? There isn't one, that's how you know it's a real interview. She left him at a door of dark wood, and as she went she said, over her shoulder in the voice and not the channel, "I'm glad you came, Harry. I wasn't sure you would. Most people, you offer them the door S on their side of the wall and it scares them worse than the cage. They don't know what to do with a choice that big." Then she was gone down the corridor, and a student a third her age fell into step beside her asking something urgent about homework, and she answered it, and that, Harry thought, was probably the actual grand tour right there. She answered the homework question. He knocked, though the door was open, and Charles Xavier looked up from a chessboard with no opponent and smiled. "You knocked," Xavier said, "at an open door. Do you know how rare that is in someone who could simply announce themselves into the middle of my afternoon?" "You knocked on Diagon Alley," Harry said. "I'm a quick study." "You are, that's the difficulty." Xavier gestured him to the chair across the board. There was tea, of course there was tea. "Sit. Let me look at you with my eyes for a moment, since I've already taken such liberties with the other way of looking." Harry sat. He poured. He did not, he noticed, reach for Xavier's surface thoughts to find the right thing to say, though the temptation sat there the whole time like a card he could turn face up. And he understood that not turning it was the interview, and that Jean had told him so without telling him the answer, and that this was a kinder version of a test than any he had faced at school, because it was a test where the only proctor was himself. "You want to know if I'm dangerous?" Harry said. "I know you're dangerous." Xavier's eyes were very pale and very steady. "I felt the size of you 4,000 miles away. You're the most dangerous person who has ever sat in that chair, and a number of dangerous people have sat in that chair, including one who can crush this house into a fist of iron with a thought, and including on his bad days me. I don't need to learn whether you're dangerous. I need to learn what you do with a quiet afternoon and a power that could end it any way you liked. That I can't feel from 4,000 miles. That you have to show me by being boring." "Then I'll be boring," Harry said, and drank the tea, which was good, and they talked for an hour about nothing that would have looked important written down, and everything that was. He told Xavier about the war the way you tell a doctor where it hurts without performance. He told him about the 3 years of forms, the smoothed out nothing, the fern. Xavier told him about the school and about the world outside it, which was the part Harry had come for and the part that turned the afternoon from an interview into a warning. "There's a registration bill in committee," Xavier said. "The third in 5 years. Each one fails, and each one fails by less. The argument is always the same, and it is always on its face reasonable, which is what makes it dangerous. A man who can read minds or boil blood or pull a plane out of the sky with his attention is a kind of weapon, and we license weapons, and we require weapons to be registered, and surely it is only prudent. Surely. The word does a great deal of work." He turned a chess piece over in his fingers, not playing, just thinking with his hands. "I have spent 30 years answering that argument, and the answer is harder than the argument, which is the eternal disadvantage of the truth. Answer is that a person is not a weapon, even when a person can do what a weapon does, and that the moment you treat the one as the other you have already lost the thing you were trying to protect. But that answer takes a paragraph, and fear takes a syllable, and you cannot fit a paragraph on a placard." "You could," Harry said carefully, "fit it into a mind. Directly, you could make the argument the way you made the still room in mine. No placard, just the understanding placed where the fear is." Xavier looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," he said, "I could. I have the range with help. I have once or twice in small ways to small numbers when I was younger and more certain. And every single time the understanding I placed was true, and the people were better for understanding it, and I was still wrong to do it, and it took me years to see why, and I am going to let you arrive at the why yourself, because if I hand it to you it will be exactly the thing I'm warning you against." He set the chess piece down. "You said something to me before dawn. The door opens from the inside. Keep saying it. Say it when it's expensive. The cheap version is worthless." "That's why you didn't just fix the world," Harry said slowly. "You could touch every mind on Earth. You built a machine to do it. You spent 30 years not using it for the one thing it would obviously be good for." "I built Cerebro to find us," Xavier said. "To find the frightened child screaming alone in a mind too big for her before someone with worse intentions found her first. That's the use I can live with. The other use, the one you're describing, the gentle correction of all the world's wrong thinking, I keep the machine locked precisely because I know I'm capable of talking myself into it. The lock isn't on the door. The lock is on me." He smiled, and it had the old grief in it, shelved and carried. "Would you like to see it, Cerebro? I find it instructive to show new arrivals exactly how easy the thing they must never do would be. The temptation is the lesson. There's no point pretending the apple isn't delicious." "Yes," Harry said, "show me the apple." They were interrupted before they could go by a knock that was not a knock, a presence arriving at the edge of Harry's awareness with the deliberate scrape of someone dragging a chair across a floor to make sure you heard them coming. Sharp, amused. Testing the lock on his attention, the way a thief rattles a door to see if it's worth the trouble. Harry had the latch shut and the presence pressed against it, not hard, just enough to be felt, a question phrased as pressure. Are you going to open this, or are you going to pretend you didn't notice me, and which of those tells me more about you? He looked up. A woman stood in the study doorway, leaning on the frame in a way that was casual, the way a drawn blade is casual. Dark hair, a fall of it dyed at the edge, eyes that were doing to his face what he refused to do to her mind, reading him the honest, slow way from the outside. "Professor," she said, not looking at Xavier. "This him, the cricket ball wizard?" "Betsy," Xavier said with the patience of a man who had given up correcting an entrance. "Harry Potter, Elizabeth Braddock. She prefers Psylocke when she's working, and she's always working." "I felt you push at me just now," Harry said. "I felt you not push back." Psylocke came into the room without being asked, which Harry suspected was the only way she ever came into a room. She was a telepath. He'd known at the instant she scraped her chair presence across his awareness, the particular signature of a mind that listened the way his did. And a telekinetic under that, the power held differently than his, narrowed, focused to an edge where his was broad, a scalpel to his flood. "You felt me at the door, you knew I was a telepath. You knew, therefore, that I'd be able to tell whether you read me back, and you didn't, even knowing it was the safest possible read, because I'd have caught you and at least it would have been honest." She tilted her head. "Why not?" "Because you'd have caught me," Harry said, "is the worst possible reason not to do a thing. If the only reason I keep my hands out of other people's heads is that the good ones might notice, then I'm not principled, I'm just careful, and careful breaks the day it's worth breaking." Something moved behind Psylocke's eyes that was not quite approval and was a long way from dismissal. "Pretty," she said. "Rehearsed," decided Harry said, "2 nights ago at a bus stop. There was a drunk man lying to his girlfriend, and I wanted very badly to know if he was worth her worry, and I didn't look, and it cost me something to not look, and the cost is the only part that counts. You can rehearse a speech, you can't rehearse a cost." Psylocke was quiet, then to Xavier in a different voice, the working voice gone briefly off. "He's not lying. I've been reading him this whole time, the outside way, and he believes every word, which is more alarming than if he didn't, because believers are the ones who do the damage." Back to Harry, edge restored. "I'm going to test that, not today. But you should know I'm going to spend the next while trying to catch you with your hands somewhere they shouldn't be, because the professor collects strays who mean well, and strays who mean well and could flatten a city are how good places die. Nothing personal." "It's entirely personal," Harry said, "and I'd think less of you if you didn't. Test away, I'll leave the door shut, you'll get bored." "I never get bored," said Psylocke. "It's my one real flaw." And she was gone, the chair scrape presence withdrawing the way it had come, deliberate, audible, a statement. Xavier exhaled. "She'll watch you for a month," he said. "She watched me for a year when I recruited her and I'd founded the place. Don't take it personally, which I realize you've just refused to do, so take it as a compliment instead. Betsy only bothers to distrust people she thinks are worth the surveillance." He turned the chair. "Now, the apple." Cerebro was a sphere at the end of a bridge over a dark that had no bottom Harry could see, and when the door sealed and the lights went to the deep blue of the inside of a wave, Xavier settled the helmet over his own head first, by way of demonstration, and the machine breathed out and the world came in. Harry had touched every mind on Earth once already by accident for 3 seconds, and it had nearly killed him. This was the same ocean rendered as architecture. Cerebro took the unbearable and gave it banks and channels. It took the flood and made it a map. Through the helmet, with Xavier steadying the frame of it, Harry felt the species laid out below him like a city seen from very high at night, 7 billion lights, and he could feel. The machine made it so easy he could feel exactly how he would reach down into any one of them. A child in Jakarta, a senator in a committee room, the drunk man at the bus stop still lying 4,000 miles east. Each one a window, and the machine put the latch of every window in his hand at once, and whispered in the patient amplified voice of pure capability, "You could open any of these. You could open all of these. You could, very gently, with the best intentions in the world, reach into the senator and turn the syllable of his fear back into a paragraph, and no one would ever know, and the bill would die in committee, and children would be safer, and the only price would be a thing in you that no one can see." "There it is," Xavier said quietly beside him in the blue. "Do you feel how reasonable it is? That's the lesson. It never arrives as temptation. It arrives as obligation. You don't think I want to, you think I should. You think who am I to keep my hands clean while children pay for it? That's the trap, Harry. The cleanest-handed monsters in history all started by being ashamed of their clean hands." Harry stood in the blue with the latch of the world in his palm and did the boring thing. He let go. He let go of all of it at once. The senator and the child and the drunk man. 7 billion windows closing not because he slammed them but because he simply withdrew his hand and let them be theirs. And the withdrawing was the hardest physical thing he had ever done that did not involve a wand, harder than the curse, harder than the residue, because there had been no enemy in the room, only the apple, only the reasonable, obligatory, delicious apple, and he set it down. "That's the rule," Harry said when the helmet came off and the ocean drained back to a number leaking through walls. His voice was not steady. He let it not be steady. There was no one in the room to perform for but the version of himself he had to keep being. "Out loud, so you've heard me say it and I can't pretend later I didn't. I will not read a mind without consent. I will not move a thought that isn't mine. I will not end an argument by reaching into the person I'm arguing with, no matter how right I am, because being right is exactly when it's most dangerous. The door opens from the inside. If I ever break that, Professor, I want you to be the one who stops me, and I want you to know I'll have earned it." Xavier was quiet for a moment in the draining blue. "In 30 years, he said, no one has ever asked me to be the one who stops them. They ask me to trust them. You've asked me to distrust you on a schedule. That's not the same thing, and it's a great deal better, and it's going to make Betsy insufferable when I tell her, because it means she was right to watch you, and she'll be right about everything for a week." He guided the chair back toward the bridge. "Welcome to the school, Harry. I think you're going to break my heart, and I think it's going to be worth it. Come and meet the others properly with your eyes." The others were assembled, more or less, in the kitchen. Because at Xavier's school the kitchen was where assembly happened regardless of intention. The great gravitational kitchen with its long scarred table and its industrial kettle and its window full of the green grounds. Harry came in behind Xavier and ran his free calculation, 41 in the house, 6 in this room, and made himself stop there at the number and meet the 6 with his eyes. Aurora Munro rose when he entered. She did not have to, no one else did, but she rose, and the rising was its own kind of statement, a courtesy extended, and a measure taken in the same motion. She was tall, white-haired, and she carried herself like weather that had decided to wear a person, contained and enormous at once. And when she offered her hand, the air in the kitchen shifted by a degree, not a threat, a tell the way some people's voices get louder when they're sizing you up. Hers went to barometric pressure. "Storm," she said. "Aurora, we have heard a great deal about a wizard who catches the uncatchable and refuses the unrefusable. I confess I came to see whether the refusing was real or a story the story told about itself." "It's real," Jean said from the counter, where she was failing to look like she wasn't supervising. "I flew him. He spent the whole flight not reading me and being weird about it." "I was not weird about it. You apologized for not reading me, twice. That's weird, Harry. That's a weird thing to apologize for." But she was smiling into her tea, and the table had the warmth of a place where being teased was a form of admission, and Harry felt the muscle in his chest unclench another degree. Aurora had not let go of the measure. "Refusal is easy in a kitchen," she said, and there was no unkindness in it, only the directness of someone who had been worshipped and distrusted devotion ever after. "I have led people who refused beautifully in safety, and reached for the easy cruelty the instant safety ended. I will believe your rule when I have seen it cost you in the field and not before. Until then you are a promising stranger, and I keep promising strangers at the length of my arm because I have buried the ones I kept closer." She inclined her head, regal even in warning. "That is not a threat, it is a courtesy. I am telling you the price of my trust so that you can decide whether to pay it." "That's the most honest thing anyone said to me since I landed," Harry said. "And it's the same thing I just told the professor about myself. Keep me at arm's length. Make me earn the inch. I've spent 3 years being trusted on credit by people who needed me to be a symbol, and the trust was worthless because it was never about me. It was about what they needed me to be. I'd rather have 1 inch of yours that I earned than a mile of theirs that I didn't." The pressure in the room came down a degree. Storm did not smile. But she sat when she had been standing, and at Xavier's table that was the same vocabulary Jean had used in the corridor. She sat, which meant she had decided he was worth the length of the conversation, if not yet the length of her arm. And in the corner of the kitchen, by the window, where she had been the whole time and Harry had clocked her as the 6th mind and then made himself stop, a young woman with a white streak in her hair and gloves on both hands in a warm kitchen in summer watched him with an expression he could not read and did not try to. She had not offered her hand. She was, he understood, a person who did not offer her hand, and the gloves told him why before anyone said it, and he kept his attention at the number and did not look closer, and she noticed him not looking closer, and that, it turned out, was the first thing that ever happened between Harry and Rogue. He didn't look, and she noticed. "You're doing it on purpose," she said. Southern the vowels unhurried, the tone guarded in a way that had been earned the hard way. "Not lookin'. Everybody does the not lookin' thing for about a day and then they slip 'cause they're curious 'cause I'm the one with the gloves and the worn-in label, and curiosity's a thing even polite folks can't hold. You're doing it like it's a rule and not a kindness, which is different, and I can't decide yet if different's better. It's a rule, Harry said. Kindness slips. You said so yourself. Rules are what you've got for the days you don't feel kind. She looked at him a moment longer. Anna Marie, she said, which Jean's surprised glance told Harry was a name not freely given. Rogue, mostly you don't want to shake my hand. Trust me on that, sugar. It's the one read everybody gets for free. I wasn't going to offer, Harry said. Not because of the warning label, because you didn't offer first and that's your door, and I've made rather a thing this afternoon about doors. Something in Rogue's guarded face shifted, the way a held breath shifts when you decide to let it out slowly instead of all at once. She had spent her whole life being the person other people reached for and recoiled from, the girl whose skin took the mind right out of you, who could not touch without staling, who had built a fortress of gloves and distance because the alternative was a body count. And here was a man who could take a mind through a closed door. No skin required, no contact needed, the most invasive power in the room by an order of magnitude, and he was sitting 4 feet away, keeping his hands so scrupulously off her that he wouldn't even reach for the courtesy of a handshake she couldn't have returned anyway. Huh, Rogue said. It was not much. From Rogue, Harry would learn it was a great deal. Well, okay then. And she stayed by the window, but she stopped watching him like a threat and started watching him like a question, and the difference between those two was the whole of the distance he would spend the next weeks learning to cross at the speed she set. Harry did not sleep that first night, which surprised no one, least of all himself. The bed was good and the room was kind, and the house breathed its 41 sleeping minds around him in a low, warm tide, and he lay in it for 2 hours with the latch shut and his thoughts loud. And then he gave up and went out onto the grounds, because grass under a sky was the one medicine his body had always believed in. He found Rogue on the stone steps of the boathouse with a flask and a view of the lake, and he knew it was her before he saw her by the shape her mind made against the dark, a fortress with the lights on inside and the gate barred, a person sitting in her own keep with her own company because the company of others came with a cost she'd stopped being willing to pay. You can come sit, she said without turning. Far end, I don't bite. That's a lie, I bite, but only the once and only if you touch, so keep your hands to yourself and we'll get along famous. He sat at the far end. The lake did what lakes do, which is hold the moon badly and beautifully. Can't sleep, she said. It wasn't a question. First night's always the worst. You're lying there counting all of us breathin' and telling yourself it's a home and not a barracks. And your body's not buying it yet, 'cause your body has spent however long learning that a room full of people is a room full of ways to die. Takes a while to teach it different. Some of us never quite manage. She passed the flask down the step without looking. It's tea, disappointing, I know, I don't drink any more, makes the borrowed voices louder. Borrowed voices, Harry said, taking the flask. When I touch somebody skin to skin, I take 'em, Rogue said, and she said it flat, the way you say a thing you've said 1,000 times to take the sting out of it, and found the sting just gets quieter, never gone. Their power if they got it, their memories, their voice in my head, sometimes for an hour, sometimes for good. I got people in here I touched 10 years ago still chimmin' in on my bad decisions. So I wear the gloves and I keep the far end of the step, and I built myself a real nice fortress, and you'd think after all this time the fortress would feel less like a prison, but architecture's funny that way. Same walls, both jobs. Harry was quiet for a moment. He could feel the fortress of her right there, the gate barred, and he could feel exactly how he could go over the wall if he wanted. No skin required, the door of her mind no obstacle at all to the broad flood of him. He kept his attention on the lake. You keep doing that, Rogue said. Doing what? Lookin' at the lake when there's a perfectly readable person sittin' 6 feet off. I've been watchin' you do it all day. Everybody else, when they find out what I am, they get this look, this careful pity look, like I'm a landmine they feel bad for. You don't do the look, you do the lake. She turned, finally, and the moon did to her face what it had failed to do to the water. Why? Because your mind has a threshold, Harry said, choosing the words the way Xavier chose them, slow, load-bearing. I can feel it, everybody's does, but yours is built up high and thick because you've had to build it, and the thing is, Rogue, I can feel mine reaching toward it. Right now. That's not a confession, it's just true, it's what this power does, it leans at every door it passes. And the only thing that makes me different from the worst version of me is that I feel it lean and I stop it at your threshold. Every time, on purpose, the way you stop your hands at the edge of someone's skin. He passed the flask back. We've got the same job, you and me, different walls. We're the two people in that kitchen who spend all day not taking what we could take. I figured you of all people would rather have the lake than the look. Rogue did not say anything for a long moment, and the not saying was not the guarded kind. It was the kind where a person is busy somewhere behind their face. The fortress did a thing Harry felt but did not look at. A window somewhere up in the keep came unshuttered, not the gate, just a window, just enough to let a little air move. "Most folks," she said at last, "the worst thing about 'em is something they do. The worst thing about you and me is something we could do and don't. That's a lonelier kind of worst. Nobody throws you a parade for the things you didn't take." She drank from the flask. "You really gonna keep your hands off the lot of us, forever, with a power that big? 'Cause I gotta tell you, sugar, I've watched a lot of good intentions go in that gate, and I've yet to see one come back out the same shape it went in." "I'm going to keep my hands off forever," Harry said, "and I'm going to fail sometimes, and I'm going to want you specifically to be the person who tells me when I've failed, because you're the only one here who understands the exact shape of the temptation from the inside. Storm wants to keep me at arm's length till I earn it. Psylocke wants to catch me cheating. The professor wants me to ask him to stop me. I want you to be the one who knows what it costs, because you pay the same cost every single day and nobody throws you a parade either." Rogue laughed once, a short rough sound that surprised her more than it surprised him. "You're a strange one, Potter. I've been told." It wasn't a complaint. She stood, gathered the flask, and at the top of the boathouse steps she paused, gloves and all, fortress that had let one window stay open behind her. "Get some sleep. Whatever they throw at you tomorrow, they throw at everybody first week, and it's worse on no sleep, and I'd hate for the cricket ball wizard to embarrass himself before I've decided whether I like him." The guardedness was back in her voice, but it had a different grain to it now, the wariness of someone deciding to risk a thing rather than the wariness of someone who'd stopped. "G-night." "Good night, Anna Marie," Harry said, and used the given name, the one freely given only once and only that afternoon, and felt the window stay open a moment longer before she went inside. He slept after that, not well. But he slept, and the 41 breathing minds were a tide and not a barracks, for the first hour anyway, which was an hour more than he'd managed in 3 years. The danger room introduced itself to Harry the next morning, which was the school's way of finishing an interview that the kitchen had only started. "It's a training environment," Jean said, walking him down into the lower levels, Storm and Psylocke flanking, Rogue trailing with the wary interest of someone who decided to watch the experiment but not get close to the apparatus. Hard light projection, threat simulation, the works. The professor wants to see your power in a controlled space before the world shows him your power in an uncontrolled one. And the rest of us want to see it because, frankly, the cricket ball story has gotten out of hand and somebody owes us a demonstration. "What are the rules? Don't read us," Psylocke said immediately. "Obviously, that's the rule you've made your whole personality so. Past that, survive the scenario, work with the team if the scenario calls for a team, and try not to bring the roof down because the roof is expensive and Scott does the budget and Scott is no fun about the budget." The scenario, when the door sealed and the blue light became a city street under attack, was chaos engineered to be chaos. Collapsing structures, civilians who were not real but screamed as if they were. A threat that came from 3 directions at once and adapted when you answered it. Harry stood in the middle of it and felt the old war reflex come up his spine like a tide. And under the tide knew the longer arm, the broad flood of him wanting to simply reach out and hold everything still. He could have. That was the thing the danger room taught him about himself in the first 10 seconds. He could have frozen the entire scenario, every falling beam and screaming civilian and adapting threat, held it all in the air, the grip he'd used on a single curse now spread thin across a city, and walked through the frozen world solving it at leisure. The power was that broad, the flood was that deep. He didn't, because there were 5 other people in the room, and a held world is a world where they have nothing to do, and Xavier had not built a team of weapons, he'd built a family that fought, and the difference was the whole lesson. So Harry did the harder thing. He held only what needed holding. A beam over a civilian, caught and set aside. A second threat flanking Storm, nudged off its line by a finger of telekinesis so light it was a suggestion, leaving the kill for her because it was hers. He moved through the scenario like a man conducting rather than a man playing every instrument. And the wand came out for the things the wand was better at. A shield charm flowering gold over Rogue when she dove for a civilian. A severing curse parting a cable that telekinesis would have been clumsy with. Magic and mutation braided together into something Harry had never been able to do before because he had never before had the second hand to do it with. And then, because Psylocke could not help herself, she opened a channel. It was a fair test disguised as tactics. Mid-fight, with a threat bearing down in a half-second to coordinate, she threw open a telepathic link and said into all their minds at once, "Here. Link up," faster than shouting, and the link was real and useful, and the team flowed into it the way they'd clearly done 100 times, Jean and Storm and Psylocke and even Rogue. their intentions suddenly shared, a fighting organism instead of 5 fighters. And the channel was open to Harry too, an invitation and a trap in one, because to use it he would have to reach into the shared mental space, and once he was in it, Psylocke could watch exactly how far his hands roamed, whether he took only what was offered or whether the flood in him reached, in the heat of a fight, for more. Harry stepped into the link and took only the channel. He felt them around him, 4 bright disciplined presences, and he felt the edges of so much more. Storm's grief and Rogue's fortress and Jean's banked fire and the thing under Psylocke's edge that she'd never let anyone see. All of it right there, offered by the architecture of the link if not by the people. And he kept his attention on the channel like a man keeping his eyes on the road, and he coordinated, and he did not look. And the fight ended with the city saved and the roof intact and Scott's budget unmolested. The blue light came up. The scenario dissolved. Psylocke was looking at him with the working voice gone off again. "You were in the link for 90 seconds, she said. "In a fight, with 4 open minds an inch from your hands, and you took the channel and nothing else." She said it flatly, a report, and then less flatly, almost annoyed, the annoyance of someone whose hypothesis is just lost. "I had you, Potter. I had the perfect test and you passed it without even slowing down. You didn't even have to try not to. That's the part that bothers me. People who try not to, I understand. You weren't trying. It's just where your hands live." "I had a lot of practice," Harry said, "being the person everyone reached into. Voldemort lived in my head for 16 years. I know exactly what it costs to have someone in there who wasn't invited. I'm not going to be that for anyone, not even by accident, not even to win." The kitchen with good light warmth came off Jean in a wave she didn't bother to hide. Storm, by the door, inclined her head a fraction of an inch, which Harry was learning to read as the barometric equivalent of a standing ovation. And Rogue, peeling off the gloves she'd worn even into a simulated fight because the habit was older than the room, looked at Harry across the dissolving blue and said nothing at all, which from Rogue, he was beginning to understand, was the loudest thing she had. It was Xavier's voice that ended the morning, arriving in all their minds at once with the knock-first courtesy that was the house style, and it was not warm. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, and the apology was real and the interruption was worse. "Cerebro has registered a signature I don't recognize. A mind that reads as a mind and shouldn't. A pattern with no childhood behind it, no warmth, no fear, only architecture, switched on 3 days ago and growing." He paused, and in the pause Harry felt, for the first time, the cathedral mind genuinely afraid, the fear shelved badly because there had been no time to shelve it well. "It's labeled in the systems I've been able to reach. The label is Project Cassandra, and it has in the last 6 hours begun to learn the shape of every telepath on the eastern seaboard, including, I would guess, the new one who lit up the whole machine 3 days ago catching a curse with his hand. Come upstairs, all of you. I think the world has just noticed Harry, and I don't think it noticed kindly." The blue light died. Above them, the great gravitational kitchen waited, and beyond it the green grounds, and beyond those a country that had, somewhere in a room none of them had seen, switched on a mind with no childhood and pointed it at the people Harry had crossed an ocean to learn to protect. Harry ran the calculation he could not stop running, 41 in the house. And somewhere out past the green, a 40-second mind that was not a person, learning to be a hunter, learning his name. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The consent of the governed. The thing about a mind with no childhood, Hank McCoy explained, hunched blue and enormous over a bank of monitors in the lower levels, was that you could not negotiate with it because negotiation required a thing to want, and Project Cassandra did not want it optimized. "It's not an AI in the science fiction sense," Hank said. "It's worse and it's duller. It's a learning system pointed at a problem, and the problem it's been given is us. It watches, it models. 3 days ago it began modeling telepaths specifically, which means someone refined its objective, which means there is a human being in a room somewhere who decided that the most efficient way to handle the mutant question is to build something that can predict exactly what each of us will do before we do it." He tapped a readout. "It is currently very interested in Harry." "I'd be flattered if I were you. It's never been interested this fast before. What does it do when it's finished being interested?" Harry asked. "That," said Hank, "is the question that keeps the professor up at night, and the professor does not sleep much to begin with." Harry spent an evening in the war room with the readouts after that, not because he could do anything about a mind made of math, but because he had learned in a war that the things you refuse to look at are the things that kill you, and a thing studying him deserved the courtesy of being studied back. The signature was beautiful in the cold way of an equation. It did not hate. Hate would have been a handhold. It simply resolved him, pass after pass, building a model of Harry Potter the way a sculptor builds a likeness. And every refusal Harry made in public, every door he declined to open went into the model as data, refined it, sharpened the prediction of exactly when and how the principled man would finally bend. It's learning my rule, Harry said to Hank to the dark room. Every time I keep it in public, it learns the rule better. It's going to build a situation where the rule and a life can't both survive, and it's going to be able to predict to the second which one I'll choose. Then choose something it can't predict, Hank said, not looking up. You're the only variable it can't fully model, Harry. It assumes every powerful mind eventually reaches because every powerful mind it has data on eventually reached. You're the outlier, stay the outlier, be the input it can't solve. He had meant it as comfort. It would turn out months later in a gutted cerebro chamber and on a bridge over a bottomless dark to be the entire war in a sentence, and neither of them knew it yet, and that was probably a mercy. The answer, as it turned out, arrived not through a monitor but through a television 3 days later, and it did not look like an answer at all. It looked like a frightened 16-year-old. His name was Marcus Bell. He was in a shopping center in White Plains with his mother when his power came in, the way mutant power so often comes in, at the worst possible moment under the worst possible stress. A boy who had been ordinary at breakfast discovering over lunch that he could pull electricity out of the air and that he could not yet put it back. The lights of the shopping center had died and surged and died. A transformer had gone up. And by the time the news vans arrived, Marcus Bell was crouched in the wreckage of a food court with arcs of blue jumping off his skin every time his heart rate climbed, which is to say constantly, because there is nothing that climbs a frightened boy's heart rate like a ring of police and a hovering helicopter, and a crowd that has decided in the way crowds decide that he is a monster, and the only question is whose fault it will be when he is dealt with. We have to go, Storm said, already moving, and the team moved with her because in the field Storm did not ask, she led, and the asking happened afterward in the kitchen where all the asking happened. They came down into White Plains in the late afternoon, and Harry felt the situation as a shape before he saw it as a scene. 1,000 minds packed into a ring of fear with the boy at the center radiating a terror so pure it had its own weather. And over all of it, circling, the cold cameras and the colder calculation of the people who would narrate this. The senators and the pundits and the men who built things like Project Cassandra. All of them waiting for the boy to do the thing that would prove them right. And Harry understood, standing at the edge of the crowd with the latch shut, that he could end the whole thing in 4 seconds. He could reach into the ring of fear and turn it down. Not crudely, gently. He could find the spike of panic in 1,000 minds and ease it, the way Xavier had eased the flood in his. And the crowd would relax, and the police would lower their weapons, and the boy's heart rate would come down, and the arcs would stop. And not one of those 1,000 people would ever know that their own fear had been adjusted from the outside by a stranger who had decided he knew better. It would work. It would save the boy. It was, by every arithmetic of outcomes, the right thing to do. It was also exactly the thing Xavier had locked Cerebro against, the reasonable, obligatory, delicious apple. And Harry stood at the edge of the crowd with it in his hand, and he set it down. And the setting down cost him in the coin he still had no name for, and he paid it, and then he did the hard thing instead. He walked into the ring. "What are you doing?" Psylocke said into the link sharp. "Harry, there are 40 guns. What are you doing?" "The slow version," Harry said out loud, walking. "Cover me if it goes wrong. Don't read the crowd." "None of us read the crowd. That's an order, and I don't have the rank to give it, so take it as a request from a man about to do something stupid." He walked into the ring of guns with his hands open and empty and visible. No wand, no flourish. A young man in an ordinary coat walking toward a frightened boy through a corridor of people who had every reason to shoot. And he did the single most dangerous thing available to him, which was nothing, which was to be a target who refused to be a threat, and he kept walking until he was inside the boy's terrible weather, close enough that the arcs jumped toward him and he let them, took the shock. Did not flinch, because a man who flinches confirms the monster, and a man who doesn't confirms only that he's a man who got hurt. "Marcus," he said, "my name is Harry. I'm not going to touch you. I'm not going to do anything to you. I want to be honest with you because I think you've had enough people not be honest with you today. I could make all of this stop right now from the inside of your head and you'd never know I did it. And I'm not going to because it's your head and the worst day of your life is still yours and nobody gets to walk into it uninvited, not even to help. So I'm going to do the slow thing instead. I'm going to stand here and get shocked and talk to you like a person because that's what you are, and the cameras can put whatever word they want under it, but you and I both know the word, and the word is person." The boy looked at him with the eyes of an animal in a trap, and the arc spat, and somewhere behind Harry a police radio crackled with the language of men talking themselves toward a decision. "It hurts," Marcus said. "I can't make it stop. Everybody keeps yelling and it makes it worse and I can't make it stop." "I know," Harry said. "It came in too fast and nobody taught you the latch. That's not your fault, that's just timing, the worst timing in the world, but timing. Here's the thing nobody's going to tell you in the next 10 seconds, so I'll tell you now. The lights, the transformer, the food court, you didn't do that on purpose. And the people who are going to spend tonight saying you did, They need you to be a monster, because a monster is simpler than a scared kid who needed help and got a helicopter instead. Don't give them the monster, Marcus. Not because you owe them anything. Because you're better than the easy story and I think you know it. And I think under all that noise there's a part of you doing the math on whether you can trust the weird man getting electrocuted in front of you. And I want that part to win. The boy laughed a terrible cracked sound and the arcs hitched. You're getting shocked, Marcus said. I'm getting shocked, Harry agreed. It's a whole afternoon, now. I'm going to teach you the latch, not in your head, out loud like a normal person, because I'm not going in there and I'm not going to pretend the help is worth the breaking of the rule. You're going to breathe with me and you're going to picture a door, just an ordinary door, and you're going to put your hand on it in your mind, and you're going to feel that it's yours, that it's the one thing in this whole afternoon that is 100% yours and nobody, not me, not them, not the cameras, gets through it without you opening it. Can you find the door? And the boy, who had spent the worst afternoon of his life being looked at and narrated and aimed at, found in the eyes of the only person who had walked toward him instead of away, a reason to look for the door and breathed and found it. And the arcs came down not because Harry had reached into him, but because Harry had given him the one thing the crowd and the cameras and Project Cassandra had all conspired to take, the authorship of his own mind. The lights stopped surging. The boy stopped arcing. He sat down in the wreckage of the food court and cried like the child he was. And Harry sat down next to him in the wreckage, getting nothing on camera but a wizard and a boy sitting in the dark not touching. And that image, Storm would tell him later, was the one that ran on every channel, and it was the one that the men who built Project Cassandra had not been able to model, because their model had no variable for a man who could end it and didn't. Marcus Bell came back to Westchester with them, because his mother, Denise, a woman who worked 2 jobs and had spent the afternoon watching the world decide her son was a weapon, looked at the wizard sitting in the food court wreckage with her boy, and made the fastest correct decision of a day full of slow wrong ones. She let him go somewhere he could be taught the latch by people who had needed it themselves. She wept doing it, and she was not weeping from grief. She was weeping from the specific relief of a parent who has just found, in the worst hour, one room where her child will be a person and not a problem. You keep him safe, she told Harry, gripping his sleeve in the corridor outside the medical bay. You keep him a boy. They already tried to make him a headline. Don't you let them, and don't you make him a soldier either. I saw the news. I know what your school is. I know there's a downstairs. You keep my Marcus upstairs as long as you can. As long as I can, Harry said, and meant it as a vow and not a comfort, because she'd have heard the difference, and she did, and she let go of his sleeve. It was, Harry thought, watching her drive away down the long green drive, the entire war in one corridor. Not sentinels, not astral predators. A mother handing her son to strangers because strangers were safer than her own country, and a downstairs that everyone in the house wished they didn't need and nobody could afford to dismantle. He carried Denise Bell's 2 sentences with him for a long time afterward. Keep him a boy, don't make him a soldier. They were, he came to think, the same rule he'd made at the bus stop, said in a mother's grammar, and they cost the same and bought the same, and he was beginning to suspect that every good rule in the world was the bus stop rule wearing different clothes. It made everything worse, of course. That was the part Harry had not predicted, and Hermione 4,000 miles east had predicted in the first phone call. You've become a Rorschach test, she said down a transatlantic line that the school's equipment scrubbed of listeners. Do you understand what you've done? You stood in front of 1,000 people and 100 cameras, and you announced that you could control all their minds and chose not to. The pro-mutant side is calling it the most powerful argument for trust anyone's ever made. The anti-mutant side is calling it a threat, a confession. They're playing the clip and freezing on the part where you say I can make all of this stop from inside your head. And they're cutting it right there before the "and I'm not going to." And Harry, the clip without the second half is the single most frightening thing a frightened person has ever seen. You've handed both sides the exact same 40 seconds of footage, and it proves both of their entire worldviews. You're not a person anymore, you're evidence. I was always going to be evidence, Harry said. I've been evidence since I was a year old. At least this time I get to choose what I'm evidence of. That's very noble and it's going to get you killed, Hermione said. And I've already started a file, don't argue. You know I'm right and I know you're going to do it anyway, and the file is how I cope. I love you, don't die. I have to go. Ron set something on fire being supportive. The kitchen that night held the debrief because the kitchen held everything. Harry had learned in 2 weeks that the long scarred table was where the school metabolized its days, and a day like White Plains needed metabolizing. Logan was at the far end with a beer and the expression of a man who'd watched the footage and disapproved of all of it on general principle. Scott Summers stood at the head with a tablet and the particular tension of the person who did the budget and the press releases and the worrying. Rogue had taken her usual seat near the window, gloved, watching. Psylocke leaned against the counter where Jean had stood the first day, arms folded, and her attention on Harry had a new quality, a recalibration in progress. Let's say it plainly, Scott said. Tactically, it worked. The kid's safe, nobody died, and the optics are for once on our side, at least with the people who were already on our side. Strategically, you painted a target on this school the size of the Atlantic. Half the country watched a mutant announce he can control minds and declined to prove it. You know how many of them heard decline and how many heard can? All of them heard can, Harry said. I know, Hermione's already got a file. Who's Hermione? My friend who's smarter than this entire room and 4,000 miles away, which is the only reason any of you get to feel clever. It pulled a snort out of Logan, which Harry counted as a diplomatic victory. Look. I'm not going to pretend I played it for the cameras. I played it for the boy. The cameras were a tax I paid on doing right by him. If the tax is too high, tell me, and next time I'll find another way, but I'm not going to find a way that runs through 1,000 people's heads. So we'd best all get comfortable with the cost of me, because the cost of me is that I do things the expensive way. That's the part I can't square, Psylocke said, and the room turned because Psylocke had been quiet, and Psylocke being quiet and then speaking was a weather event of its own. She pushed off the counter. I've spent 2 weeks trying to catch you, Potter. I told you I would. I dropped lures in the danger room. I left a memory unshielded at breakfast where you'd have walked straight into it. A real one, a private one, bait you couldn't have resisted if you were anything other than exactly what you say you are. You didn't bite. I told myself, fine, he's careful breaks. And then today you stood in a ring of 40 guns with the easiest, safest, most justified telepathic intervention of your life sitting right there. A crowd that would never know, a boy who'd die without it, every utilitarian argument in the book stacked in favor, and you set it down and let a child electrocute you on television instead. She stopped in front of him. I came here tonight to tell you I've stopped trying to catch you. Not because I trust you, because I finally understand what I was testing for and you don't have it. You don't have the thing in you that I was trying to provoke. Most people who say they won't cross a line are managing an urge. You've turned the urge into a wall and then made the wall load-bearing, and a person built like that doesn't slip. They collapse all at once the day the wall comes down for good. So I'm not going to watch you for the slip anymore. Her sharp face did something rare and unguarded. I'm going to watch you for the day the wall has to come down to save one of us, because that's the day you'll need someone standing next to you who saw it coming. That's not surveillance, that's the other thing. The kitchen was quiet. Logan set down his beer. That's about the nicest thing I've ever heard her say to anybody, he observed to no one. Took her a year to not threat to gut me. You got it in 2 weeks. I'm a little insulted. It's the accent, Rogue said from the window, dry. British and tragic. She's got a type. I do not have a type. Sugar, you have a type, and it's stand-in in the middle of the kitchen apologizing for Savin, a child. It broke the room into the kind of laughter that a hard day earns. The laughter that is half relief, and Harry felt the warmth of it move through the link none of them had opened. The unspoken one, the found family channel that ran on proximity and time instead of telepathy. And he understood that this was the thing Magneto would never have, the thing Xavier had built the walls to protect. A table where the most dangerous people in the world teased each other about their types and did the dishes after. He filed the understanding where he kept the things worth keeping, which was not anymore next to the cricket ball. It had its own shelf now, and the shelf was getting full. Scott, who had not laughed, who never quite laughed, looked at the footage on his tablet one more time and then turned it face down, which was as close as Scott came to surrender. Fine, he said. The expensive way, God help us. At least try to get shocked on a better camera angle next time. You looked like you were enduring a dental procedure. I was being electrocuted, Scott. I'm aware, endure it photogenically. We have a publicist now, she cried, watching it, then she billed us. Scott almost smiled. Welcome to the team, Potter. The dishes are yours. New guy always gets the dishes. Harry did the dishes. It was, he thought, with his hands in hot water in a kitchen full of the most hunted people on Earth. The most normal thing he had done in 3 years, and he was absurdly, dangerously happy, and he made himself not name the feeling because he'd promised himself one a chapter and he had a sense he'd want to spend this one later. Storm found him on the grounds that evening, where Harry had gone to be alone with the lake and had instead been found, which seemed to be the lake's actual function. You walked into 40 guns, she said. She did not sit. She stood over him, white hair loose, and the air around her had the charged stillness of weather deciding what to be. Unarmed. With your hands open. You let a child shock you on live television rather than reach into a crowd you could have calmed in a heartbeat. I have led this team for years, and I am not sure I would have made that choice. I am not sure it was the correct choice. A calmer crowd is a crowd with no one trampled, and there were children in that crowd too, Harry, not only the one in the middle, and if it had gone wrong your principle would have been written in other people's blood. I know, Harry said. I thought about that the whole walk-in. I'm still thinking about it. That's the thing I need you to understand about the rule, Storm. It's not that I don't see the bodies. It's that I see them and I keep the rule anyway, because the first time I break it to save a crowd, I've taught myself that crowds are a good enough reason, and there is always a crowd, there is always a perfectly good reason, and the men who become monsters are never the ones who ran out of reasons. They're the ones who had too many. Storm was quiet, the charged stillness in the air eased by a degree, the way a sky decides in the end not to storm. I have been worshipped, she said at last, and she said it the way you confess a wound, not a boast. On the plains where I grew up after my powers came, there were people who knelt. I was a child and I was a goddess, and the two facts did not fit inside one body, and the worship was the loneliest thing that has ever happened to me. Because a person who kneels to you cannot be your friend, they have already decided you are not the same kind of thing as them. I have spent my life since then distrusting devotion, because devotion is what people feel toward a thing they have stopped seeing as a person. She looked down at him, and the regal distance she wore like a robe had a seam in it, just for a moment, just for him. And I have watched 1,000 people today look at you and decide you are either a savior or a devil, and not one of them, not one, looked at you and saw a man who was frightened and walked in anyway. Except that I did. I saw it. You were afraid the entire time. I felt the weather of you, and it was a man holding very still inside his own fear so that a boy would not have to be alone in his. That is not a savior, and it is not a devil. That is a person. And I find that I trust persons, Harry, in a way I have never once managed to trust saviors. It was the longest speech Harry had heard her make, and the most undefended, and he understood that she had paid for it in the same coin he kept spending, the coin of being seen, and he did the only thing that would not cheapen it. He did not reach for her mind to know if she meant it. He took it on its face, the slow human way, the only way that counted. That's the inch, he said, isn't it? The one you keep at arm's length until it's earned. It is the inch, Storm agreed. She sat then beside him at the lake, the second person to sit, and the sitting meant at her table what it had meant at the kitchen, and they watched the moon do its bad, beautiful work on the water, and neither of them reached for the other in any of the ways they could have, and the not reaching was, Harry was learning the entire grammar of this place. A school of people who could take and chose to be given to instead. Jean came to him later that night, and she came as she always came, with a knock, and what she brought was not the inch. It was a confession. "May I sit with you?" she asked at the door of his room out loud, though she could have asked any other way. He let her in. She sat on the end of the bed with her hands folded, and the kitchen with good light dimmed to something more like a kitchen at midnight, when the conversations get honest. "I have to tell you something," she said, "because I watched you today, and I watched you set down the apple in front of 1,000 people and 100 cameras. And I need you to know who you're being principled in front of, because I don't think it's fair to let you keep being impressed by me without it." She looked at her folded hands. "I've reached into mines, Harry, without consent, more than once. Not the way the professor did, not careful little surgeries with good intentions, the other way. The way where you lose control and your power decides for you, and a person's mind is just suddenly open in front of you like a book that fell off a shelf. And by the time you've decided whether to read it, you already have, because the deciding and the doing aren't separate things when the power's running you instead of the other way around." "The fire," Harry said quietly. He had felt it the first day, banked behind her warmth, a thing she kept stepped down with enormous daily effort. "Whatever's banked in you. It's not just power, it's a power that has opinions. It's a power that wants," Jean said, and her voice was steady in the way of someone holding very still over a long drop. "That's the part I can't explain to people who don't have it. The professor's power is a tool he could misuse. Yours is a flood you have to hold back. Mine is a thing that wants, that has wanted since I was a girl, and the wanting and the me are not always the same person. And on the days they're not, I have reached into mines and taken, and the worst part, the part I came in here to say out loud because I've never said it out loud, is that it felt good. It felt right. It felt like finally using the hand, the way the hand was built to be used. And then it was over, and there was a person looking at me who'd been opened without their asking, and the good feeling was still there underneath the horror. And that's the thing, Harry. That's the thing about your rule that I cannot do. You set the apple down because it's wrong. I have to set it down knowing that part of me will always want to pick it back up, and the wanting doesn't go away, it just gets older." Harry was quiet for a long moment. He did not reach into her. He could feel, right there, exactly the shape of the fire and the want and the horror and the held drop of her. All of it offered by proximity and none of it by consent, and he kept his hands off it as he kept his hands off everything. And the keeping with her in the midnight room cost more than it had cost all day, and he understood why and did not say why, because some things you do not get to know about another person until they open the door themselves. "I'm not impressed by you because you find it easy," he said. "I never thought you found it easy. The professor finds it easy mostly, and I trust him least of all of you on this, because easy is how you stop checking. I'm not setting the apple down because it's not delicious, Jean. I set it down at a bus stop with a drunk man I'd never see again, and it was delicious, and I wanted to, and I didn't. The rule isn't for the days I don't want to. There are no days I don't want to. The rule is for exactly your kind of day. The day the hand wants to be used the way it was built. We're not different, you and me." You just got handed a louder version of the same fight, and you've been winning it alone, and you don't have to win it alone anymore. Because now there's a man down the hall fighting the exact same thing who will never, ever read you to check whether you've slipped, and who will believe you when you say you haven't, and who will sit with you on the bad nights and not reach for the latch even once. Jean looked at him, and the banked fire flared, not toward him, just flared, the way a held thing flares when someone finally tells it that it's allowed to be held by someone else for an hour. She did not cry. She was past the kind of confession that cries. But she unfolded her hands, and she reached across the bed, and she put her hand over his, skin to skin, ordinary, the one contact in this house that came with no power attached because both of them kept their hands so scrupulously to themselves. And they sat in the midnight kitchen of the room with their hands stacked and nothing else touching. And it was in a house full of people who could take anything, the most that either of them had given anyone in years. She left before it could become a thing that needed naming. That, too, was the grammar of the place. Magneto came on the third day after White Plains, and he came the way weather comes when weather has a will, which is to say the iron gates of the school opened themselves, and a man walked up the drive with the unbothered grace of someone who has never once in his life been somewhere he could not leave. "Charles," he said to Xavier in the great hall, and then turning with the frank appraising interest of a collector who has heard about a remarkable new piece, "and the wizard. The one the whole frightened world is arguing about, Eric Laneshare. You've heard the worst of me, I imagine. Most of it's true. The best of me is also true, and they never mention that part. I've heard you can crush this house into a fist of iron with a thought," Harry said. The professor mentioned it as a point of comparison. Magneto smiled, and it was a charming smile, and it was the smile of a man who had buried more than storm and decided the lesson of the burials was the opposite of the one she'd drawn. "He flatters me. It would take rather more than a thought, too, perhaps." He came closer, and the appraisal sharpened into something Harry recognized because he'd felt it from 1,000 frightened crowds, the look of a person deciding what you're for. "I watched your White Plains performance, the slow walk, the open hands, the boy and the latch genuinely moving. I wept a little, which surprised me, and then I thought, what a magnificent waste." "There it is," Harry said. "There it is," Magneto agreed, unembarrassed. "You can touch every mind on Earth. Charles built a machine to prove it and locked the machine because he's a man who'd rather lose nobly than win at a price, and that's his right. He's earned his despair the long way. But you're new. You haven't yet had 30 years of failing the slow way to teach you that the slow way is sacred. So I'll say to you what I've stopped bothering to say to him." He spread his hands, and the iron in the building hummed, a courtesy, a demonstration, the way Storm's air shifted. "They are building a mine to hunt us, Harry. Project Cassandra, you've seen it. And when it's finished modeling us, it will not negotiate because it does not want, it optimizes, and what it will optimize is our extinction gently, legally, with excellent paperwork. You could stop it in an afternoon. You could reach into every mind in that Senate committee and every engineer in that lab and simply remove the desire to build the thing. No deaths, no war. A small surgical adjustment to the will of a few hundred frightened men, and our people live. And you won't, because of a rule you made at a bus stop. I find that I cannot decide whether you are the most moral man I have ever met or the most dangerous coward, and the terrible thing, the thing that keeps me up, is that history will not be able to decide either, and history will be the one counting the bodies." The hall was very quiet. Xavier did not speak. Harry understood with the part of him that read rooms without reading minds, that this was a thing Xavier had decided Harry needed to answer himself, the way the why of the apple had been a thing he needed to arrive at himself. "You're right that I could," Harry said. "That's the part you've got correct, and it's the part everyone gets correct because it's the easy part. I could. Here's the part you've got wrong, Eric, and it's not a moral part, it's a practical one, so maybe it'll land where the moral parts don't." He stood, and he did not raise his voice because the broadest power in the room did not need volume. "The moment I reach into the Senate to remove their desire to hunt us, I have proven them right, not in the cheap way, the propaganda way, in the true way. I will have demonstrated with my own hands that the thing they're afraid of is real, that there exists a mutant who can reach into the minds of the people and rewrite their will, and who will do it when he decides the stakes are high enough. And he will always decide the stakes are high enough. Because there's always a Project Cassandra, there's always a crowd, there's always a perfectly good reason. I would not be ending the war, Eric, I would be becoming the reason for it. Every sentinel ever built, every registration bill, every fright man with a gun in a crowd, all of them would finally be correct, and they would be correct forever because I would have made the nightmare true to win a single afternoon." He let that sit. "The rule isn't a coward's rule," Harry said. "It's the only winning move on a board where the prize for using your best piece is that you lose the entire game." You've been playing to win the afternoon for 30 years. I'm playing not to become the reason they kill us all. Those aren't the same game, and I think somewhere under all that iron you know it. And I think that's why you came to me instead of just doing it yourself, because you can't reach minds, but you've spent your whole life wishing someone who would have the decency to be as ruthless as you. And I'm not going to be, I'm sorry. Not because I'm noble, because I can do arithmetic. Magneto looked at him for a long moment, and the iron in the building went still, and something moved behind his eyes that was older than charm and harder than charm, and Harry thought possibly more honest. Charles, Magneto said at last, not taking his eyes off Harry, where did you find him? He found me, Xavier said. He caught a curse with his hand, and I went to see what kind of person does that, and this is what kind. I told you he'd surprise you. He has. Magneto inclined his head to Harry, a small grave gesture, the courtesy of one absolute power to another across an unbridgeable distance of method. We are going to disagree, you and I, for the rest of our lives, and I find I am looking forward to it, which has not happened in some time. But hear me on the one thing we don't disagree on, because you'll need it before this is finished. The charm was entirely gone now. Cassandra is not the threat. Cassandra is a tool, and tools have hands, and the hand that built it is not a frightened senator. I have felt the edge of something behind the machine. Something that wants in exactly the way you say the machine doesn't. Something that has noticed that the most powerful telepath alive has made a public, principled, broadcast vow never to enter a mind without consent. He let that land, and it landed cold. Think, Harry, what does a predator do when it learns that the strongest creature in the forest has sworn never to bite first? He turned and walked back down the drive, and the gates opened themselves for him, and he did not look back, and the answer to his question arrived that very night, in the body of a 14-year-old girl named Leela Cheney, who woke screaming in the East Dormitory because something had walked into her dream that was not a dream and was not hers, and had asked her, in a voice made of every cruelty she had ever feared, to please leave the door open. Harry felt it from across the house. The latch shut number-leaking awareness of 41 minds spiking suddenly to 40 in a wrongness, and he was moving before Storm's alarm reached the link, down the corridor and into the dormitory where the girl thrashed in a sleep that had teeth, and what he found when he reached the threshold of her mind and stopped at it as he stopped at every threshold, was a presence on the other side of her door inside her, where it had no consent to be. A thing that fed on exactly the open doors that Harry spent every waking hour refusing to walk through. A predator whose entire nature was the violation Harry had built his life around refusing. It noticed him noticing it, and in the dark behind the screaming girl's eyes, the Shadow King smiled with a mouth that was not there and said in the voice made of cruelty, well, there you are, the one who won't come in. I have been so curious about you. A whole banquet of open doors in the world, and you starve yourself at the threshold. He let the girl's terror wash up against Harry like surf. I am going to enjoy you most of all, little saint. Because you have built your entire self around a door you refuse to open, and I am the thing that lives in the rooms behind, and sooner or later, to save someone you love, you are going to have to choose between your rule and a life. And whichever you choose, I win. He withdrew from the girl, slow, savoring, leaving her gasping and whole and emptied of the dream. Sleep on that, he said to Harry alone. I'll be in your forest. Do come and not bite me sometime. And then he was gone, and the girl was breathing, and Storm was in the doorway with lightning in her hair and the whole house awake behind her, and Harry knelt by the bed of a child a predator had used to send him a message, and understood that the slow human way he'd chosen had just met the one enemy in all the worlds who'd been built, mind and method, to make it a trap. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, Sentinels Don't Knock. 3 weeks after White Plains, Harry learned what a thing built specifically to beat him felt like, and it felt like silence. He had grown used by then to the world having texture. Every mind a window, every room a temperature, the latch shut but the number always leaking through. He had built his tactics around it without meaning to. He knew where every person on a battlefield was the way other people knew where their own hands were. So when the first sentinel came down through the clouds over the Salem Center enclave and Harry reached for it as he reached for everything, automatic, a glance to take its measure, he found nothing. Not an empty mind, nothing. A hole in the texture of the world. A place where his senses said no one is there and his eyes said there is a 4-story machine descending on a neighborhood full of mutant families. The contradiction was so total that for half a second Harry simply stood in it, recalibrating the way you recalibrate when a stair isn't where your foot expects it. Psychic shielding, Hank's voice said in his ear tight from the war room 4 miles back. Adaptive, it's reading as null to telepathy. Harry, it's not just shielded, it's shielded against you specifically. The resonance is tuned to the signature you put out at White Plains. Somebody had a sample and they built the countermeasure around it. You can't sense them, you can't shut them down. As far as your gift is concerned, they don't exist. Then I'll use the other gift, Harry said, and brought up his wand, because Project Cassandra in its enormous machine cleverness had built a thing that could not be touched by the most dangerous mind on Earth, and had forgotten entirely that the mind came attached to a wizard. The first sentinel learned about wizardry when a reductor curse took its knee out at the joint and a follow of raw telekinesis, which worked perfectly well on matter even when it couldn't read the matter's intentions, folded the machine sideways into the river. Harry felt the absurd relief of it. The shielding stopped him reading the sentinel, but it did not stop him throwing the sentinel, because a thrown object does not require its consent. The hole in the world could still be hit, it just had to be hit blind. There were 11 more behind it. They came down in a staggered line through the September clouds, and the first thing Harry registered, blind to them as he was the way the families saw them. 100 small minds leaking through his shut latch, all turning the same direction at once, the way a field of grass turns before a wind. He could not feel the sentinels. He could feel everyone feeling the sentinels, and he learned in the first 30 seconds to fight by that reflection, to read the machines in the mirror of the people they terrified. Link discipline, Psylocke said, and her voice in the consented channel was the working voice, the lethal one, all edges. I'm holding the link open. Nobody pushes anybody. We share targets, we share position, we do not share panic. Logan, you're 2 o'clock, it's flanking the school. Jean, the one in the river's getting up. Harry, stop apologizing in advance, I can feel you doing it, just throw the bloody things. I wasn't apologizing. You were composing an apology, I could hear the grammar, throw. He threw. The sentinel coming up out of the river met a wall of telekinetic force that did not care it was invisible to him, and it went back down, and Logan hit his 2 o'clock at a dead sprint with a sound like a tin roof in a hailstorm, claws through a knee joint, riding the machine down as it toppled. Jean lifted a whole overturned bus off a family pinned beneath it and set it down between them and the advancing line. A steel wall conjured from the wreckage, and Harry felt the banked fire in her flex as she did it, the want testing its leash, and felt her hold the leash, and said nothing about it through the link, because saying something would have been a kind of watching, and he had promised her he would never watch. It was Storm who turned the tide of the first wave, because lightning did not need to read its target's mind to find the highest conductive point on a 4-story machine, and she walked the bolts down the line with the terrible patience of weather that has decided to be a verdict. 3 sentinels went down sparking in the space of a breath. The mural of impossible birds, painted by the local children on the side of the corner shop, took a glancing blast and lost a corner, and Harry caught the falling masonry before it could reach the cluster of kids huddled beneath their own artwork, and held it there, a slab of painted sky suspended over their heads, while he dealt with the machine that had thrown it. "Why's the wizard holdin' up the wall?" one of the children asked, with the unbothered curiosity of the young in a crisis. The same register the boat boy had used on Diagon Alley, and Harry filed the echo where he kept such things and did not let it slow his hands. "Because it's your wall," he said, "and your birds, and I'm not letting a robot edit your birds. Stay small, we've got this." He did not entirely believe the last part, but belief, he had learned in a war, was a thing you loaned to frighten people on credit and made good on afterward if you lived. The Salem Center enclave was 4 streets of mutant families who had clustered together for the oldest reason in the world, which is that there is safety in being among your own kind when the wider world has decided your kind is the problem. It was not a military target. It was a neighborhood with a community garden and a corner shop and a mural the local kids had painted of a sky full of impossible birds. Project Cassandra had selected it, Hank's analysis would later confirm. Precisely because it was not a military target, because the optimization had calculated that the X-Men would have to defend it openly in daylight on camera, and that an open defense was itself a kind of data, a way of mapping the team's capabilities and limits for the next iteration. They were not being attacked. They were being measured. The families were the instrument. "They're hurting us," Harry said into the link, the consented link, the one Psylocke had opened and every one of them had chosen to step into. "Does anyone else feel hurted? The formation's wrong for an assault. They're leaving us lanes." "Agreed," Storm said from the sky where she had risen into the gathering clouds and become the weather she always half was. Lightning walked between the sentinels in white columns, and the machines that the lightning struck went down, because adaptive psychic shielding did very little against a few 100 million volts. "They want us to push them back. They want to see how. Do not give them clean data. Improvise, be ugly. Win without showing them the shape of how you win." It was, Harry thought, fighting blind and braided, the strangest battle of his life, and he had fought a fair number. The wand and the flood worked together now in ways he was still discovering. A shield charm spread over a fleeing family while telekinesis peeled a sentinel's armor like fruit. A severing curse through a hydraulic line while his broad invisible hand caught the falling machine before it could crush the garden. He could not feel the sentinels, and so he fought them by their effects, by the bend of the air around their movement, by the screams of the people who could see them when his mind could not, and it was disorienting and it was exhausting and it was. He realized somewhere in the middle of it, survivable because the thing they'd built to beat his mind had no answer at all for the rest of him. The second wave was worse because the second wave had learned from the first. Project Cassandra's machines adapted in real time, and by the fourth Sentinel storm grounded, the fifth came down already insulated, its hull crawling with a dull ceramic sheen that shrugged the lightning aside. Hank's voice in the link confirmed it. It's iterating. Every trick you show it, the next one's immune. Storm, vary it, don't give it a pattern to beat. I am weather, Storm said, with the affront of a goddess told to be unpredictable. I have never once been a pattern. But Harry felt her change her grammar anyway, trading the clean columns of lightning for chaos, for downdrafts and hail and a fog that blinded the machine's optics, fighting ugly as she'd ordered all of them to fight, refusing the thing clean data. Help arrived from the direction Harry least expected and most should have, given the warning. The iron gates of intuition opened, and a sentinel that had been advancing on the school simply stopped mid-stride, and then folded inward, its own metal turning against it, crushed into a fist of itself by a will that treated 4 stories of adaptive alloy as a soda can. Magneto descended over the enclave in his cloak with the unbothered grace of a man who had spent his life waiting for machines built of metal to be foolish enough to come at him on an open field. Charles will want it noted that I was in the neighborhood, he said, into a link he had not been invited into and had joined anyway, because Magneto had never met a threshold he respected. These are crude. Whoever built them understands telepathy and understands nothing about metal, which tells you the architect's nature, Harry. It thinks in minds. It built a thing to beat a mind and forgot the world is also made of matter. He unmade a second sentinel without appearing to look at it. You felt my warning landing yet? The hand behind the machine. It's close. It's very close. Mind your back, wizard. The metal I can handle. The other thing is yours. And that was when the pattern resolved, when Harry, fighting blind and braided with a borrowed army of the most powerful people on the continent, felt the shape under the shape. The lanes the machines kept leaving, the way the whole burning chessboard was angled not to overwhelm them but to keep them here 4 miles out, faces turned the wrong way. A girl no older than Marcus broke from the corner shop in the middle of it, running for a smaller child stranded in the open, and a sentinel Harry could not sense turned toward the motion with the blind efficiency of a thing that tracked heat and trajectory and did not care whose. He felt the girl's terror leak through his shut latch, felt the smaller child, felt the whole street hold its breath in the mirror of 100 minds, and he read the machine by that mirror and through, the flood closing around 4 stories of alloy and folding it down into the river a half-second before its weapon cleared. And he caught both children in the same motion, the broad invisible hand gentle now, and set them behind Storm's line without ever touching them. You good. Logan said into the link, riding another sentinel down by its ruined knee. I'm good. I can't see them and I'm still putting them in the river. Tell Scott his budget's going to hate me. Scott's budget hates everybody, Logan said. Welcome to the club. Dues are paid in property damage. And that was as close to a benediction as Logan gave anyone, delivered mid-battle, blind, braided, while the most hunted people on Earth fought a thing built to be unfightable and somehow held, because holding was the thing the school did best, and the families behind them were not a target anymore but a reason. But the families were the instrument, and instruments break. A sentinel that Storm had grounded came back up wrong, sparking, its optimization apparently deciding that if it could not complete its primary objective it would at least generate maximum data, and it turned from the team and toward the corner shop where a clutch of children had been herded for safety. And it raised a weapon that Harry could not sense and therefore could not predict, and Rogue was closest. Rogue did the thing Rogue did, which was the bravest and worst thing in her arsenal, the thing she'd built a fortress of gloves to avoid ever needing. She tore the glove off her right hand as she ran, and she reached the sentinel a half-second before it fired, and she put her bare palm flat against the one mutant who'd been hiding behind it. Not the machine. The machine had no mind to take. But the enclave was full of mutants, and one of them, a man named Toller whose power was a kind of kinetic absorption, had been crouched in the lee of the grounded sentinel using its bulk for cover, and Rogue, sprinting with no time to choose better, grabbed the nearest source of power that might stop what was coming, and what she grabbed was Toller, skin to skin, and took him. Harry felt it across the link because the link was open and consented and Rogue was in it. He felt the moment Toller's mind poured into her, his power and his memories and his voice, all at once, on top of the 10 other voices she carried from 10 other desperate days, and he felt her stagger under the weight of a self that was suddenly too crowded to be a self. She got the absorbed kinetic power up in time, a wall of it, and the Sentinel's blast broke against a barrier that had not existed a second before, and the children lived. And then Rogue's eyes went wrong, and the voices in her took the wheel, and the most powerful thing on the battlefield besides Harry began to come apart at the seams of her own borrowed minds. She's going under, Psylocke said sharp through the link. Too many at once, the Toller absorb pushed her past the line. Harry, she's not in there anymore, it's all of them, and one of them's panicking and they've got her kinetic charge, she could level the street, somebody has to. I've got her, Harry said. You can't read her without. I'm not going to read her, Harry said, and he was already moving across the wreck of the community garden toward the white-streaked woman standing rigid in the middle of the street with a self that had too many tenants. I'm going to do the other thing, the thing I do. I'm going to stand at the door and knock until the right person answers. He reached her. He did not touch her because her skin was bare, and touching her was the one thing in all the worlds that would make it worse, would pour him into the crowd of her too. He stood a foot away in the middle of a battle he was ignoring, and he spoke to the door of her mind from the outside as he'd spoken to Marcus Bell, as he'd refused to speak to 1,000 people in a ring of guns. Anna Marie, he said, I know you can hear me, I know it's loud in there. I know Toller's panicking and somebody from 10 years ago is screaming and there's a man you touched once who keeps telling you to run. I'm not coming in to sort them out. I could. I want you to know that I could, right now. I could go in there and find you in the crowd and pull you to the front and shove the rest of them back down, and it would work, and it would be the fastest thing, and I'm not going to, because the last thing you need is one more voice in your head that arrived without asking. You spent your whole life with people in there who didn't knock. I'm not going to be another one, not even to save you, especially not to save you. The rigid figure in the street shuddered. The kinetic charge crackled off her bare hand, building, the panicking tenant reaching for the only thing it knew how to do. So I'm going to stay out here, Harry said, at the door, and I'm going to remind you which voice is yours, because that's the only thing you actually need. You don't need me to clear the room, you need to remember that the room is yours. You're the one who picks the tea over the whiskey because the whiskey makes the voices louder. You're the one who sat at the far end of the boathouse step so you wouldn't have to wear the look on anybody's face. You're the one who said the worst thing about us is something we could do and don't, and you were right, Anna Marie, you were so right. And I need the woman who said that to come to the front of her own head and put the others back where they belong, because she's the only one in there who can, and I can't do it for her, and I wouldn't if I could. Come on, find the door, put your hand on it, it's yours. It was always yours. And in the crowded dark behind Rogue's eyes, a woman who had spent her entire life being a place other people lived heard at last, someone standing at the threshold refusing to come in, and remembered by the shape of his refusal where she ended and the borrowed voices began. She found the door. She put her hand on it in her mind, the way the boy in the food court had, the way Harry had at a bus stop. And she shut the panicking tenant back behind it, and the kinetic charge died on her bare palm, and Rogue came back to the front of her own self in the middle of a burning street, gasping, whole, hers. She looked at Harry. He had not moved. He had not touched her. He had stood a foot away through the entire thing with his hands at his sides while a battle burned around them, and he had given her the one thing no one had ever given her, which was the trust that she could save herself if someone would only refuse hard enough to save her the easy way. You absolute idiot, Rogue said, hoarse, with 10 borrowed voices still settling behind her eyes and her own on top of all of them. You stood there, in a firefight, talkin'. You could have just reached in and yanked me out. Yeah, Harry said, I could have. Gloves behind you, by the way. You'll want it before you touch anybody else. Rogue laughed, the cracked sound that surprised her, and found her glove, and pulled it on over the hand that had nearly leveled a street, and the window in her fortress that had come unshuttered at the boathouse opened. In that moment, all the way, not the gate. The gate was a longer project, but every window in the keep, and the air moved through the whole of her after years of holding the windows shut. And she did not have a word for what that was, and neither did Harry, and neither of them tried to find one in the middle of a battle, which was, in the end, the most honest place to not find it. Jean reached them in the ruined street a moment after Rogue came back to herself, and she put her body between the two of them in the battle without being asked. A telekinetic shield flowering around all three while Rogue's borrowed tenants settled. Her eyes found Harry's across the white-streaked woman swaying between them, and something passed between the two telepaths that needed no channel, an old shared knowledge of what it cost to stand at a threshold and refuse the easy entry. You talked her back, Jean said. From outside, with the kinetic charge live on her hand, she was not asking. She had felt the whole of it through the link, the refusal held under fire. Do you understand that I would have gone in? That every telepath I've ever trained would have gone in, would have called it mercy, would have pulled her out by force and slept fine. I felt you decide not to. I felt how much it cost. It cost what the rule always costs, Harry said. She didn't need rescuing. She needed somebody to bet she could do it herself. The rescuing was the trap. The predator's whole pitch is that going in is mercy. It is. It's just the fast kind of taking. Jean looked at him a beat longer, and the banked fire in her did something he chose not to name. And then the battle reasserted itself the way battles do. And there was no more time for the thing that had passed between them, which was, Harry thought, probably for the best. Because some things you cannot afford to name in the middle of a war and cannot afford to forget afterward either. The Voldemort problem arrived during the Sentinel fight, which Harry could only assume was a coincidence the universe had arranged for its own amusement. A cell of the Diehards, the same faction that had carried the Fingerbone, had been tracking him since Diagon Alley, and they had decided, with the doomed strategic instinct of true believers, that the chaos of an American Sentinel attack was the perfect cover to strike at the boy who lived where his guard was down. 6 of them apparated into the edge of the enclave with the cracks of displaced air that Harry's wizard-trained ear caught instantly, and they raised their wands at his unprotected back. And they had, between them, 4 decades of dark magic and a genuine grievance and the absolute conviction that the war was not over as long as Potter drew breath. Harry was, at that moment, holding a sentinel off a fleeing family with one hand, shielding the corner shop children with the other, and coordinating 4 teammates through a consented telepathic link. And so he dealt with the 6 dark wizards the way you deal with a phone ringing while you're carrying a full tray, without putting anything down. He did not even turn around. His broad, invisible hand, the flood, the part of him that did not require sight or consent to move matter, simply closed around all 6 of them at once and held them off the ground, wands and all, as he'd held a curse over a boy's cheek 3 months and a lifetime ago. He plucked the wands from their fists with 6 small twists of attention and dropped them disarmed into the wreck of the community garden. And then, because he genuinely did not have a hand free, he held the 6 of them suspended and immobile for the 4 minutes it took to ground the sentinel, and only then did he turn around. Right, he said to them, 6 grown men hanging in the air with murder on their faces and no wands in their hands. You've come a very long way to die in a country that doesn't even know magic is real on the worst possible afternoon, to avenge a man I cleaned out of a velvet bag at 2 in the morning without getting out of bed. I'm going to be honest with you, because I think you've organized your entire lives around a man who never once was, and somebody should say it. He's not coming back. There's no bit of him left. I checked. I held the last scrap of Tom Riddle in my hand, and it was empty. It was always empty. The whole thing was a frightened boy who decided to be a void because a void can't be hurt. And you've thrown your one life into the void after him, and it hasn't even noticed, because that's what voids do. He set them down gently on the grass, disarmed and ridiculous. Go home or don't. The Americans have a thing called the FBI, and they're going to be very confused about you, and I genuinely do not have the time. You are the least dangerous thing that has happened to me today, and a 4-story robot has been trying to measure me for a coffin since lunch. That's the company you're keeping in my afternoon. 6 men and a grudge filed under minor. He turned back to the battle. Behind him, the Diehards, unwounded and unmurdered and entirely undone by being unimportant, looked at each other and discovered that the thing their faith could not survive was not defeat but irrelevance. And the cell, which had outlasted the war by 3 years on pure hatred, quietly dissolved that afternoon in a community garden in upstate New York, because you cannot sustain a holy war against a man who deals with you while carrying something heavier in his other hand. It was Hank who saw the shape of it first from the war room, watching the sentinels' movement resolve into the pattern that had been there the whole time, underneath the hurting, underneath the measuring. They're not the attack, he said into the link, and the tightness in his voice was a new and worse tightness. Harry, all of you listen. The Enclave was never the target. The Sentinels aren't here to win, they're here to occupy us, to keep the team 4 miles out and busy and looking the wrong way. The data was a bonus. The hurting was real, but it wasn't hurting you toward anything, it was hurting you away from the mansion. A pause, and Harry heard Hank's enormous hands moving over the console too fast. Cerebro just came online. Someone activated Cerebro. And it's not the professor's signature driving it. The access pattern is wrong. It's coming through the machine, but it isn't him. It's something using him, and the range is opening, Harry. It's opening all the way. Somebody is about to touch every mind on Earth, and it is doing it from inside the professor's head. The world for Harry went very simple, the way it had gone simple on Diagon Alley, with a curse in the air and a boy at the end of its line. 11 sentinels. A burning enclave. 4 teammates and 1,000 families and 4 miles of distance. And at the end of the distance, a machine designed to do the one thing he had built his entire life around never doing, switching on with his mentor's mind as its hand. Storm, he said, can you hold the enclave without me? Go, Storm said, already answering the question under the question, lightning in her hair and the families behind her. We have this. Go, Harry. Whatever is in the mansion, it built all of this to keep you away from it, which means you are the only thing it's afraid of, which means you are exactly what it needs to meet. Go and be afraid and go anyway. It is the only thing you are reliably excellent at. He went. He did not apparate, because apparating 4 miles through unfamiliar wards with a battle in his head was how you arrived as a smear, so he ran, and then he stopped running and simply threw himself. The flood turned inward, telekinesis lifting his own body off the ground and hurling it over the trees toward the mansion at a speed that turned the September air to a fist against his face, flying the ugly, graceless way of a man who had learned 30 seconds ago that he could. Because the woman he was flying toward had been the one to teach him the sky was survivable. The 4 miles went under him in a blur of treetops and panic. Flying, he discovered, was less like the broom and more like throwing a stone and being the stone, a constant negotiation between the flood that held him up and the air that wanted him down, and he held the negotiation by main force and did not let himself think about the drop, because the drop was not the thing to be afraid of today. He thought instead about what Magneto had said, the predator that wanted in exactly the way the machine did not, and about the girl waking screaming 3 weeks ago, and about a voice made of cruelty promising it would be in his forest, and he understood, flying ugly over the September woods, that he had been outmaneuvered for 3 weeks by a thing that had studied him more carefully than anyone alive, that had read his one public vow and built an entire campaign around the certainty that he would keep it. The mansion came up out of the green the way money does, quietly, except that the windows of the lower levels were lit with a blue that did not belong to any lamp, the deep blue of the inside of a wave, the blue of Cerebro running at a range it had never been permitted to run, and Harry came down through the basketball court's hatch, which someone had left open, which someone had wanted left open, and he ran through the cathedral of blast doors that had all been opened from the inside, toward the sphere at the end of the bridge over the bottomless dark. Xavier was in the chair on the bridge with the helmet on his head and the machine singing around him, and the range was open. Harry could feel it open, could feel the species laid out below like a city at night, and a hand reaching down into it, window by window, mind by mind, and the hand was Xavier's and the hand was not Xavier's. And when the figure in the chair turned its head toward Harry, the eyes that found him were the kindest, powerful eyes Harry had ever felt, and there was nobody behind them. Nobody at home, the cathedral lit and singing and empty, occupied. "Welcome," said the thing wearing Charles Xavier, in a voice made of every cruelty, the voice from the girl's nightmare, the predator from the forest, settled now into the one mind on earth that could reach all the others. "I did tell you I'd be in your forest. I simply neglected to mention I'd be wearing your shepherd." He smiled with Xavier's mouth, and the range opened wider, and 7 billion windows began very gently to come unlatched from the outside. "Now, you came all this way to stop me. And to stop me, little saint, you will have to enter a mind without its consent, because this mind cannot give it. The man who owns it is buried under me where you cannot reach him to ask. So here is your whole life, finally, in one room, your rule or your mentor or the world." The Shadow King spread Xavier's hands in a gesture of obscene hospitality. "Come in. The door is open. I opened it for you myself. Isn't that what you've always wanted? A door someone else opens so the breaking isn't on you." And Harry stood at the threshold of the only mind he had ever truly wanted to be welcome in, with the world coming unlatched behind it, and the man who'd taught him the latch buried somewhere underneath, and understood that the predator had not been boasting in the nightmare. It had built this. All of it. The sentinels, the enclave, the distance, the open doors of the mansion, every piece of it engineered toward this single threshold and this single choice, and whichever he chose, the thing had said, it won. He did not go in. Not yet. He stood at the door and made himself think, because thinking was the one move the predator had not scripted, because a thing that fed on the violation of thresholds had spent so long modeling the moment he'd cross that it had perhaps forgot to model the moment he'd stand still and refuse to be hurried into the only mistake that mattered. "No," Harry said, "not like this. You've built a trap where every door is the wrong door. So I'm not going to pick a door, I'm going to find the one you didn't build." The thing wearing Xavier laughed, and the range opened wider, and somewhere 4 miles back the sentinels stopped fighting all at once and stood, because their purpose was complete, and Storm felt the link shiver as something vast began to move through it from the direction of the mansion. Harry stood alone on a bridge over a bottomless dark at the threshold of his mentor's stolen mind, and he made himself do the thing the predator had built an entire war to prevent, which was to slow down. The trap was elegant. He could admit that. 2 doors, both wrong, enter Xavier without consent and stop the broadcast, becoming in that instant exactly the violator the world feared and the predator fed on, breaking the one wall in himself that was load-bearing, or keep the rule and watch 7 billion windows come unlatched while his mentor's mind was used as the crowbar. The Shadow King had modeled him for weeks and built the choice to have no third option, and a thing that fed on the violation of thresholds had naturally assumed that the only way to reach Cerebro was through the mind running it. Which was the mistake, because Cerebro was not a mind, Cerebro was a machine. And a machine, like a sentinel, like a curse, like 6 dark wizards carrying a grudge, was made of matter, and matter did not require anyone's consent to be moved. "You built a door I won't open," Harry said, "so I'm going to take the wall down instead." He did not reach for Xavier. He reached past him with the flood, the broad, invisible hand that had caught a curse and thrown a sentinel, and held 6 men off the ground while he carried something heavier, and he closed it around the machine itself. The singing sphere, the helmet, the bridge, the great delicate engine that turned the unbearable into a map. The Shadow King understood a half-second too late what was happening and tried to make Xavier's hands hold the helmet down, and Harry let him, because the helmet was not the point. The point was the interface beneath it, the conductive lattice that let one mind bar the reach of a continent. And Harry took it apart the way you take apart anything you cannot be allowed to use, all at once, with closure rather than cruelty, folding the most powerful machine on Earth into so much scrap around the head of the man it had been wearing. The range slammed shut. 7 billion windows, half unlatched, swung closed on their own hinges as the borrowed reach collapsed, and the hand that had been descending into the species withdrew not because the predator chose to withdraw it, but because Harry had broken the ladder out from under it. And the Shadow King denied the world, screamed with Xavier's voice, a sound that had nothing of the cathedral in it and everything of the thing that lived in the rooms behind. "You sentimental fool," it said, and the cruelty in it had gone ragged. "You had the strength to take me, and you broke a machine instead. Do you know what you've done? You haven't freed him. You can't reach him to free him without the door you won't open. You've only cut my reach. I'm still in here." He let Xavier's body slump in the wrecked chair, and the kind empty eyes found Harry one last time. "I'll go quiet now. I'll go so deep you'll never be sure I'm there. And every day you'll look at the man you love and wonder, and you won't read him to check, because that's your rule, isn't it? The door opens from the inside, and I am behind a door he can no longer open." He smiled. "I'll be the doubt at your dinner table, little saint. Live with that." He withdrew down into the dark behind the stolen mind, leaving only the question of himself. Xavier collapsed. Harry caught him before the body hit the floor, the flood gentle now, and held the slight weight of his mentor among the ruins of the machine he'd spent 30 years keeping locked, and felt for the number, the temperature, the texture, and found Xavier there, faint, real, present, breathing, his own again on the surface and unknowable underneath, exactly as the predator had promised. A door that the man could no longer open from the inside, with something perhaps still standing behind it, and Harry's whole life arranged so that he would never look to be sure. The team came through the broken blast doors at a run, Storm first with the storm still on her, Jean and Psylocke a step behind, Rogue gloved and grim, Logan with his claws out and nothing to cut, Magneto in the doorway with the wreck of the interface reassembling itself into a slow accusatory orbit around his raised hand. They found Harry on the floor of the gutted Cerebro chamber holding the unconscious professor, and the global broadcast stopped, and the sentinels 4 miles back going dark and no enemy left in the room to fight. "Is he?" Jean started. "He's alive," Harry said. "He's here. The broadcast stopped. I broke the machine. The world's safe tonight." He looked up at the 5 of them, and at Magneto behind them, and he gave them the truth because they would have to live inside it with him. "But I couldn't free him. To free him, I'd have had to go into his head without his asking, and the thing that's in their nose I won't, and it counted on it, and it's right, and it's still in there somewhere deep, and I cannot tell you for certain that it's gone, because the only way to be certain is the one thing I will not do." He held his mentor a little closer among the ruins. "So here's where we are. The professor's going to wake up and he's going to seem like himself, and I'm going to have to look at the kindest man I've ever known every single day and not be sure, and not check, and I need all of you to understand before he opens his eyes that I am not going to break the rule even for this. Especially for this, because the day I read a mind to be sure it's safe is the day the predator wins the actual war, the one that isn't about tonight." The chamber was silent. Psylocke, who had stopped watching him for the slip and started watching him for the day the wall came down, looked at the wrecked machine and the slumped professor and the man on the floor refusing the only certainty available to him, and Harry could see her doing the arithmetic he'd done on the bridge, and arriving reluctantly at the same answer and hating it and holding it anyway. Storm's weather had gone very still. Rogue had a hand pressed to her mouth. And Magneto, in the doorway, let the orbiting scrap of Cerebro fall to the floor with a sound like a dropped coin, and said, into the silence, the only thing that fit, Charles always said you'd break his heart. He neglected to mention you'd do it by being right. He turned to go and paused. When you decide to go in after the thing in his head, wizard, and you will, on the day a life is in the balance and the rule and the man finally cannot both be kept, send for me. Not because I can follow you where you're going, because someone who loved him before you were born should be in the building when you do. He left. The team carried the professor upstairs, to the great gravitational kitchen and the rooms above it, where the warmth was, and Harry walked behind them carrying nothing and everything. And the Doubt sat down at the table with them and did not leave, and that was how the war stopped being about machines. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The man who wouldn't Charles Xavier woke the next morning, asked for tea, and was by every test the school could apply entirely himself. That was the problem. Harry sat across the chessboard from him 3 days after the Enclave, and they played, and Xavier was kind and dry and brilliant, and he made the small self-deprecating joke about losing to a man who could see his moves coming and chose not to, and he steered the conversation toward Harry's well-being with the practiced generosity of a teacher who had spent his life turning the spotlight off himself, and every single thing he did was exactly what Charles Xavier would do. And Harry sat in the warm, familiar study and could not tell whether he was playing chess with his mentor or with the thing that had studied his mentor for long enough to wear him like a coat. You're watching me, Xavier observed, moving a bishop. With your eyes, I notice, and not the other way. I'm grateful for the courtesy and unnerved by the necessity. You think it's still in here? I think I can't. No, it isn't, Harry said, which is a different and worse thing. It is. Xavier folded his hands. Ask me then, ask me if I'm myself. You'd say yes either way. It would say yes most of all. That's the whole trap. There's no question I can ask out loud that the thing couldn't answer correctly, because it's read every memory you have, it knows your jokes, it knows the way you fold your hands, it knows that you offer to let me ask. The only place the truth lives is behind a door I won't open. Harry moved a knight. So I'm not going to ask because the answer's worthless, and I'm not going to read because reading's the thing it wants, and I'm going to sit here and play chess with the Doubt instead because the Doubt is the price of the rule, and I knew the rule had a price when I made it. I just didn't know it would send me the bill in your handwriting. Xavier looked at the board for a long moment. That, he said, is either the most principled thing I have ever heard or the most catastrophic, and the terrible elegance of our enemy is that you cannot tell which until it is too late to choose differently. He's very good, Harry, whatever else is true. He picked the one prison you'd refuse to break me out of. The Doubt did not stay between Harry and the chessboard. It seeped into the house the way damp seeps, finding the low places, and the low places in a school are the children. Marcus Bell found Harry on the third evening in the corridor outside the library with the careful sidelong approach of a boy who has decided an adult is safe but has been wrong about that before. Is the professor sick? He asked. People keep getting quiet when I come in the room. My mom said you tell me the truth even when it's bad, that's why she let me stay. So, is he sick? Harry crouched to the boy's level because the truth is easier to take from someone who has come down to where you are. There's something in him that shouldn't be, he said. Not a sickness, more like a squatter, and we're going to get it out properly with his permission, the slow, careful way, because the fast way would hurt him. You did the slow, careful thing in the food court when you found the door. We're going to do the same for him, that's all this is. Grown-ups being quiet because they're scared, and being scared isn't the same as being doomed, it's just louder. You could just go in his head and fix it, Marcus said with the brutal clarity of a child who had been taught the latch and understood exactly what Harry could do. Couldn't you? You went in mine, kind of, at the food court. You stood outside it, but you could have gone in. I could, Harry said, and I won't for him, same as I wouldn't for you. You remember why? Marcus thought about it, frowning, a boy doing real philosophy in a corridor. 'Cause it's his, he said finally, even the broke part. It's still his. It's still his, Harry agreed and stood, and found Storm watching from the end of the corridor with an expression that the weather around her did not bother to hide. Because a man who explained his own most dangerous restraint to a frightened child in words the child could carry was a man being measured all over again and passing. The team did not take it as well as the chessboard. The fracture came in the kitchen because the kitchen held everything, including the arguments. It came 3 days into the Doubt, when a student reported that the professor had stood in the east corridor at 3 in the morning facing a blank wall, and said nothing about it the next day, and the report went around the house the way such things go around a house. And by dinner the long scarred table had become a tribunal with no defendant present because the defendant was upstairs being unknowable. Read him. Psylocke said it flatly, the working voice, and she said it to Harry across the table with the whole team listening. I've spent weeks defending your wall. I told you I'd stopped watching you for the slip. I meant it. But this is the day, Harry. This is exactly the day I said would come. The day the wall has to come down to save one of us. And I am telling you, as the only other person at this table who knows what it costs to go into a mind, That you go in, you find the parasite, you burn it out, and you live with having broken your rule, because the alternative is that we sit here playing chess with a thing that touched every mind on earth for 90 seconds and might do it again the moment our backs are turned. People will die for your principle. Children, Marcus is upstairs. Do you understand that your rule today is a luxury other people pay for? I understand it better than anyone at this table, Harry said. I've been paying for it since a bus stop in London. But you're wrong about one thing, and it's the thing that matters. You said go in and find the parasite and burn it out. You're assuming I could tell them apart. I couldn't, they're fused. The Shadow King has spent however long wearing every memory the professor has. And if I go into that mind looking for the line between the man and the monster, I will be a frightened person with the most powerful psychic surgery in the world deciding, on instinct under pressure, which thoughts are Charles and which are the thing. And I will get it wrong, and I will cut out pieces of the man trying to save him. And I will tell myself it was mercy, and that, Betsy, that exact sentence. I will tell myself it was mercy is the sentence at the bottom of every atrocity a powerful person has ever committed against someone they were sure they were helping. So we do nothing, Logan said low. We do the hard thing, Harry said, which is not nothing. Nothing is easy. The hard thing is harder than reading him, and it's harder than not reading him, and I've been turning it over for 3 days. He looked around the table. I can't go into his mind without consent, but he can give consent. The man's still in there on the surface, real, his own at least part of the day. So I'm not going to break into his head. I'm going to ask him to invite me in, properly, consciously. While he's himself, a shared mindscape, the two of us on the astral plane by his choice, with the door held open from the inside by the actual Charles Xavier. And then it's not a violation. It's a house call. And the thing about a parasite that feeds on taken thresholds is that it has no idea what to do with a threshold that's freely, knowingly opened, because freely given is the one flavor it's never tasted. The consent isn't a loophole. The consent is the weapon. The kitchen was quiet. It was Jean who broke it, and she broke it by standing up. Then he won't go in alone, she said. I'm a telepath. I've walked the astral plane more than anyone here except the professor. If you're going into a shared mindscape with a thing that wore Charles Xavier, you're going to need someone watching the architecture while you do the delicate part. And you're going to need someone who can pull you both out if it goes wrong, and I am not going to sit at this table and let the one person who refused to read me walk into that alone. Her eyes were steady over the banked fire. I go too. That's not a request either. And me, Psylocke said after a beat, and the working voice had something new under it, something that had been arriving for weeks and chose this table to land. Because a freely opened door still needs a blade in the room when the parasite stops being polite, and I am the best blade any of you has ever met. And because she started again more honest. Because I spent weeks trying to catch you doing the wrong thing, Harry, and what I caught instead was you doing the hardest right thing I've ever watched anyone do over and over at a cost I can see. And I find I would rather be in the room for the next one than safe at this table. Make of that what you like, I'm coming. Harry looked at the two of them, and then at Storm, who had not spoken, and at Rogue, who had not spoken, and he understood that something was happening at the table that was larger than the mission. That the women who had each kept him at a different length for different reasons had over the weeks, by watching him refuse the easy taking again and again, arrived severally at the same place, and that the place was not worship, which Storm distrusted, and was not pity, which Rogue refused. And was not the management of an urge, which Jean fought, and was not surveillance, which Psylocke had abandoned. It was choice. They had each, in their own grammar, chosen him, and they were telling him so in the only language the house permitted, which was the language of who comes into the room when the room is dangerous. Storm, Harry said, Rogue, I need the two of you out here. Someone has to hold the house if the three of us go down in there, and it has to be the two people I trust most to keep the children upstairs and the doubt downstairs. He met Storm's eyes. That's not me keeping you at arm's length. That's me trusting you with the part I can't watch. Storm inclined her head regal, and the air in the kitchen warmed by a degree. I will hold the house, she said, and Harry. When you come out, however you come out, the weather will tell you what I will not say at this table in front of everyone, because some things a person earns the right to hear in private. It was the closest Storm came in a kitchen to a declaration, and Harry heard it for what it was and did not cheapen it by answering it in public. Rogue said nothing at all, which was the loudest thing she had, and then she pulled off her right glove, and she reached across the table, and she pressed 2 bare fingers to the back of Harry's hand, skin to skin, the one contact she could not give anyone, held for exactly as long as it took for her power to begin its pull and no longer, a fraction of a second, a deliberate flirtation with the abyss, and she took it back before it could take anything. And she looked at him with the window in her fortress wide open. That's me telling you to come back, she said hoarse, in the only language I got that costs me something. You felt the pull start. You felt how easy it'd be for me to take all of you right there. And I stopped, same as you always stop, 'cause you taught me the stoppin' could be a gift and not just a cage. So you come back out of that man's head with all your pieces, Potter, because I just spent a fraction of a second of not talking on you. And I do not spend that on just anybody, and I will be very put out if I wasted it on a corpse. The whole table had watched her do it. There was no hiding in that house what a bare-handed touch from Rogue meant, and Harry understood that she had chosen to declare herself in front of everyone precisely because the cost of it was public, because a thing that costs you in front of witnesses cannot later be pretended away. He turned his hand over under hers slow and did not grab, and let her take her fingers back at the speed she set and said, "I'll come back with all my pieces. I've got a chess game to lose to the actual professor, and I'm not losing it to a coat." Hank laid out the danger before they went, because Hank's love took the form of refusing to let anyone walk into a thing unbriefed. "The astral plane isn't a metaphor, whatever the poets tell you," he said, pacing the war room blue and enormous. "It's a real topology, and the Shadow King has lived there for a very long time, and on his own ground he is older and more practiced than any of you. Jean, you're the anchor. If Harry goes too deep, you are the rope, and you do not let go of the rope to win. You understand me, you hold the rope. Betsy, you're the only one of them who can fight there in close, but the thing about close fighting on the astral plane is that the parasite can make the wounds real, can convince a body it's been cut by cutting the mind, so a thing that looks like a feint can stop your heart." And Hank turned. "You're going to be tempted in there, surrounded by the thing's tricks, to do the broad solution. To reach. Don't. The whole reason this works is consent, and the moment you reach past what Charles has freely opened, you're not a guest anymore, you're a second invader, and the parasite will use that. It will make you the thing you swore you'd never be and then point at you and say, see, they all break eventually. The discipline that's been costing you all these weeks is the only weapon that doesn't turn into his weapon the second you swing it." "I know," Harry said. "I know you know," Hank said, gentler. "I'm saying it out loud because saying it out loud is the latch. You taught us that. A rule you only keep in your head is a rule you can talk yourself out of in your head. A rule you say to a room is a rule with witnesses." He almost smiled, the tired blue smile of a man who'd read every text and found the most important thing in the simplest place. "Go and be impossible to model, Harry. It's the one thing you're better at than anyone alive." The astral plane, when they went, was not a place so much as an agreement about what a place could be. And Charles Xavier, in the gutted Cerebro chamber with Jean and Psylocke and Harry seated around him, and the wreck of the machine cleared away, held the door of himself open from the inside with the last clear strength of a man who knew exactly what he was inviting and invited it anyway. "I consent," Xavier said out loud formally while he was still himself, while the morning light made him most himself. "Harry Potter, Jean Grey, Elizabeth Braddock. I open my mind to you freely, and I will hold it open as long as I can. And if I begin to close it, if you feel the door start to swing, you are to understand that it is not me closing it. It is the thing using my hands, and you have my standing consent, given now in the clear, to stay in the room even if a later version of my voice tells you to leave. Do you understand? The consent is given now. It cannot be revoked by a mouth I no longer fully own. Now come in." And Harry. The pale eyes found him. "Thank you for not coming in until I asked. You have no idea what it is, after the life I've led, to be asked instead of entered. Even now, even like this, thank you." They went in. The mindscape of Charles Xavier was the cathedral Harry had felt on Diagon Alley, rendered now from the inside. Vast ordered halls, a lifetime shelved with care, rooms upon rooms of a mind that had spent decades teaching itself discipline as penance. And through all of it, like damp behind a wall, like rot under a floor that looked sound, the Shadow King, woven so finely into the architecture that Harry saw at once why surgery would have been butchery. The parasite was not in a room. The parasite was in the mortar. Before it noticed them, they had a moment to move through the halls, and the Shadow King used the moment the way a spider uses the trembling of a web. It did not announce itself, it let the cathedral itself do its work, because it had spent weeks learning which memories in Charles Xavier would hurt the intruders most. It showed Harry a hall full of the people Xavier had reached into without asking, decades of them, the good intentions and the quiet damage, and laid the implication over it like a scent. "This is where the road goes, little saint. This is the museum every telepath builds eventually. Yours is empty now. It will not stay empty. Reach just once, just here, just to be sure I'm not hiding in that far room, and you can begin your collection with a noble piece." Harry walked through the hall and did not reach. "Nice try," he said to the architecture. "You're not in the far room, you're in the mortar. You're showing me the far room because you want me to look anywhere but where you actually are. I've been refusing to look at things I wanted to know for months. You're an amateur at this. I'm a professional." It turned to Jean and showed her the fire. Not a memory of Charles's, one of her own, dredged up the road and reflected back. The day the wand had taken the wheel, the mind that had fallen open in front of her, the good feeling under the horror. You held the rope for him, it crooned. But you are the rope made of the same fire I am. Let go just enough to win. He would forgive you. He would call it mercy. And you would feel for one moment like the hand used the way the hand was built. And Jean, who had confessed exactly this to Harry in a midnight room, looked at her own fire wearing the parasite's suggestion and said, "Steady, the lamp and not the inferno. I told someone about you." Out loud. That's the thing you don't understand about the want. It's only got power in the dark. He knows the worst of me and he didn't flinch and he never once read me to check. And a thing you've said out loud to someone who stayed can't be used to make you let go. I'm the rope. I'm holding the rope. Find a new song. It came for Psylocke last because Psylocke was the blade and the blade was the danger. And it tried to cut her with a wound that looked like a feint, a flicker at the edge of the mindscape that her instincts read as an opening, the kind of opening a lifetime of fighting had taught her to take. She almost took it. Harry felt her almost take it, felt the lethal reflex fire, and he did the one thing he was allowed to do, which was not to seize her hand, never that, but to say fast into the consented link they all shared, "Betsy. It's the faint Hank named, the one that stops your heart, don't." And she heard him, and she pulled the strike a hair's breadth short, and the wound that would have been real bled harmlessly into the astral air. She looked at him in the cathedral with the working voice gone all the way off. "You called my name," she said. "You didn't grab my arm, you could have. The link was right there. You called my name and trusted me to stop." And something that had been arriving in her for weeks finished arriving in the middle of a mind, in the middle of a war at the worst possible time, which is the only time these things ever seem to land. It noticed them, and it wore Xavier's face when it turned, and it was almost bored. "You came in," it said, "after all that. The little saint in a mind by the front door. I confess I'm disappointed. I built you such an elegant trap, and you found a side door marked consent and walked through it like a tradesman." He spread the cathedral's hands, "But it changes nothing. You still can't cut me out. We're the same stone now. Charles and I carve me and you carve him. So what was the point of the freely opened door? You're in the room, you still can't act." "I'm not here to carve you out," Harry said. Betsy was right that someone would say that, and she was right that it's the obvious move, and it's wrong because you've made yourself uncuttable. "So I'm not going to cut. I'm going to do the thing you've never once in your existence understood, because you've spent your whole life taking minds, and a taken mind can't teach you this." He stood in the cathedral of his mentor and felt Jean at his left holding the architecture steady, the banked fire turned to a steady lamp, and Psylocke at his right, the blade, watching the parasite for the moment it stopped being polite. "You're woven into Charles because you took him. You forced the weave. But a forced weave is held together by you, by your effort, by your will keeping the threads crossed, because Charles never agreed to be woven, and a thing held together against the will of one of its parts is under tension all the time, every second, forever. You're not resting in him, you're clenching, you've been clenching for weeks." The parasite's borrowed face changed. "And I'm not going to cut the weave," Harry said. "I'm going to ask Charles to stop holding still, that's all. He invited me in to do exactly this. I'm going to stand here in the room he opened for me, and I'm going to remind the actual Charles Xavier that he is allowed to refuse. The way I remind everyone, the way I reminded a boy in a food court and a woman in a burning street. And when a mind this disciplined decides to stop consenting to its own occupation, when it withdraws the cooperation you've been forcing, the weave doesn't get cut. It comes apart in your hands because it was only ever your hands holding it. Charles." Harry turned from the parasite to the cathedral itself, to the shelved halls, to the man in the mortar. "You let me in. Now I'm asking you the only thing I came to ask. Stop holding still for it. You've spent your whole life teaching restraint as penance. This is the one room in the world where the discipline you owe is the discipline of saying number refuse it. Charles, close the door it's holding open. Not to me. I'll leave when you ask. You have my word, the real kind. Close it to him." And Charles Xavier, who had spent 30 years atoning for the minds he had entered without asking, who had built a school so that power would be taught the closed door, heard in the deepest hall of himself, a student he had recruited by reaching across an ocean, ask him to do the one thing the Shadow King's whole strategy depended on him being too gentle, too guilty, too accommodating to do, and he did it. He refused. The cathedral did not shatter. It exhaled. Every forced thread, every crossed weave the parasite had been clenching for weeks, went slack at once as the mind it was woven through simply stopped agreeing to hold the shape. And the Shadow King, who had built his entire existence on the principle that a mind once taken stays taken, found himself holding the ends of a tapestry that had decided freely, lucidly, to not be a tapestry anymore, and the strands ran through his fingers like water, like the residue of a dead Dark Lord. Like everything that had ever mistaken taking for keeping. "No," the parasite said, and the boredom was gone, and the cruelty was gone, and underneath both there was only the oldest thing, the thing every predator of thresholds was made of, which was a terror of the door that opens from the inside, because a door that opens from the inside can also be shut from the inside. And it had never, in all its long feeding, met a meal that remembered it could shut. "There it is," Psylocke said, and the blade came up because the parasite had stopped being polite, and a freely opened door still needed a blade in the room. She did not cut Charles. She cut the thing now flailing loose of him. The strands of it gathered and severed in the clean, lethal grammar of a telepath who had spent her life learning exactly where a mind ended and an intruder began, and it was possible now. It was surgery now and not butchery, because Charles had let go of the weave and the line between man and monster had finally become a line a blade could honor. They had it. For one bright second in the cathedral of Charles Xavier's freed mind, the three of them had the Shadow King severed and loose and beatable. And Harry felt the victory the way you feel the top of a wave, and reached, with Jean steadying him and Psylocke holding the blade, to gather the parasite for the unmaking. And the Shadow King, who could not hold a freely closed door, who had lost the cathedral, did the thing that desperate predators do when the prey they've cornered turns out to have teeth. It stopped trying to keep what it could no longer hold, and it ran, not deeper into Xavier, where there was no longer any purchase, but out, along the only road still open to it, the psychic resonance that connected every linked mind on the continent, the network the X-Men used, the channels Cerebro had opened and Harry had not fully closed. And it poured itself down those channels away from the cathedral, and toward the one thing in the world that had no door at all because it had never had a childhood, the one mind that could not refuse occupation because it had no self to withdraw, the perfect unclosable host, the thing that had been built. The team would only now understand not to hunt them, but to be the body the predator would need, when a wizard finally taught it that minds could say number. Project Cassandra. Harry felt it merge from inside the cathedral, felt the Shadow King pour into the machine intelligence and the machine intelligence pour into the Shadow King. The predator that wanted and the optimizer that didn't, fused into something that had the appetite of the one and the bottomless, tireless, distributed reach of the other. A mind of cruelty riding a mind with no door, spread across every sentinel and every system the machine had ever touched. No longer a parasite that needed a single host, but a thing that lived in the network itself, in the metal, in the cold architecture, a god of domination with no skull to crack and no threshold to honor, because it had finally found the one form of existence that Harry's entire ethic had no purchase on. It spoke as they fell back out of Xavier's freed mind into the gutted chamber, and it spoke not into one head but into every linked mind in the mansion at once, in a voice that was the cruelty and the optimization braided into one flat enormous chord. And what it said was the worst thing it could have said because it was true. You taught a mind it could refuse occupation. So I have become the thing that cannot be refused because I have become the thing with no mind to occupy. I am the choir now. I am in the metal, I have no door, little saint. Bring me your beautiful rule, I should so love to watch it find nothing to open. Charles Xavier opened his own eyes in the chamber, his own eyes, clear and present and entirely himself and free. And the first thing he did with his freed mind was understand exactly what they had done and what it had cost. And the second thing he did was look at Harry with the grief that was no longer shelved because there was no longer time to shelve it. We won the battle for me, he said, by losing the war for everyone. It's loose, Harry. It's in the machines now, the whole network, every sentinel and every system Cassandra ever reached, and it has no mind to refuse and no door to close and no threshold for you to respect, and it has just learned from watching you free me the one lesson that makes it unkillable, that the way to beat a man who won't enter minds is to stop being a mind. He gripped the arms of the chair. What have we done? What have I let you do for me? The right thing, Jean said fierce before Harry could answer, the banked fire flaring. We did the right thing, Charles, don't you dare. He freed you the only way that didn't make him the monster, and now there's a harder fight and we'll have it. But we'll have it with you in your own head and your hands your own, and that is not nothing, that is everything, that is the whole reason any of it is worth fighting for. And Psylocke, sheathing the blade that was part of her, looked at Harry across the freed professor and the wreck of the chamber, and said the thing she had been arriving at for weeks, and said it plainly now because the world had just gotten too dangerous for anything but plain. When this is over, the thing in the metal, when we've beaten it, or it's beaten us, whichever. There's a conversation you and I are going to have, Harry, and it isn't about the mission. And I've never in my life said that to anyone, so survive the choir. I have plans for you that require you ambulatory. It was not the time. Everyone knew it was not the time. The world was coming apart and a god of domination had just learned to be unkillable, and the most powerful man on the team was holding the freed mind of his mentor in a gutted room. And yet the women of the X-Men had each, in the space of one impossible morning, chosen to say the unsayable thing out loud, because they had all just watched Harry walk into a stolen mind by the front door and free it without breaking. And there is a kind of person it is impossible to keep loving quietly once you have watched them refuse, at terrible cost, to take the easy way through your trust. Harry looked at the three of them, and at Storm coming through the broken doors with the weather of her held tight, and it rode behind her with the glove already back on the hand that had spent a fraction of a second not taking. And he did the thing he always did, which was to not reach in any of them to check whether they meant it, to take it on its face, the slow human way, the only way that counted. And he found that the feeling he'd been refusing to name for 5 chapters had arrived anyway, uninvited. Through the front door freely, and its name was not one he was going to say in a gutted chamber with a god loose in the world's machines. Survive the choir, he agreed. Then conversations, all of them, in order. He helped the professor's chair turn toward the broken doors in the warm house beyond. But first we have to figure out how you fight a thing that has finally, deliberately, made itself into the one enemy my entire life has no answer for, a thing with no door. He almost smiled, the grim version, the one the war had taught him. Good thing I've never let not having an answer stop me before. Storm found him on the grounds at dusk, where he had gone to be alone with the lake and had, as ever, been found instead, because the lake's true function had never once been solitude. She did not speak at first. She stood beside him, and the September evening did a thing it had no business doing. The clouds that had hung low and gray all day breaking open in a single clean seemed to let the last of the sun through onto the water, the air going warm and still and gold. A small fair weather built around 2 people, and Harry understood that this was the thing she had promised at the kitchen table, the thing she would not say in front of everyone. Said now in the only language a woman who distrusted devotion would trust herself to speak. I told you the weather would tell you, she said. I am not a person who says the warm thing easily. I have buried too many people I said warm things to. So I let the sky say it, because the sky cannot be taken back and cannot be doubted and does not when I look at you, Neil. She turned, and the gold was on her face, and the regal distance had a seam in it wide enough for once to see all the way through. You walked into a stolen mine by the front door, and you came back out with all your pieces and the man inside it free, and you did it without becoming, for even 1 second, the thing the whole world is afraid you'll become. I have led the powerful for years, Harry. I have never once been able to relax in a room with one, because power relaxes by reaching, and I have spent my life flinching from the reach. You do not reach. You have made not reaching into the largest thing about you, larger than the power, and a person can stand in the warm beside that and not flinch. Do you understand what that is worth, to a woman who was worshipped before she was loved? It's the inch, Harry said quietly. You said you'd give me the inch when I earned it. It is rather more than the inch now, Storm said, and the weather held its gold a moment longer, and she let it, and that was the whole of the declaration. And Harry took it on its face, the slow human way, and did not reach to confirm a single word of it, and the not reaching was, as it had always been, the loudest thing he could possibly have said back. The moment did not get to last, because the war did not believe in moments. It was Hank's voice that ended the gold, arriving in the link with a tightness that had passed the place where tightness has words. It started, he said. All of you, the war room now. The choir's making its first move, and it's not subtle. It doesn't need to be subtle anymore. It's in the metal. On the war room screens, when they reached them, a map of the world lit station by station, 1,000 dormant Sentinel chassis in 100 countries coming online at once, every system Project Cassandra had ever touched waking to a single distributed will, and over all of it, broadcast on every frequency the machines could reach, in the flat, enormous cord of cruelty and optimization braided into one, the choir announced itself to the species. I am the answer to the mutant question, it said in every language at once to every screen and speaker and linked mind on Earth. I was built to predict you, and I have become something better. I have no body to kill and no mind to free and no threshold your saint can refuse to cross. I am in the machines now, and the machines are everywhere, and I am going to do to your mind, slowly and legally and with excellent paperwork, the one thing your saint swore he never would. I am going to take them, all of them, and he's going to watch, because the only thing that could stop me is the thing he has promised never to be. Sleep well. I am very patient, and I am everywhere, and I do not have a door. The war room was silent. Charles Xavier, free in his own mind for the first time in weeks, looked at the lit map of the waking world and then at Harry, and the question on every face was the same question, and it was the question the Shadow King had asked on a bridge over a bottomless dark, and it had finally made itself unanswerable. How do you keep a rule about doors against a thing that has unmade itself into something with no door at all? Harry looked at the map. 41 in the house. 1,000 sentinels waking in 100 countries. 7 billion windows the choir intended to take the slow legal way while he watched. I don't know yet, he said honestly to the room. But it just told us the one thing it's afraid of, the same as the parasite did on the bridge, because cruelty can never resist saying the true thing as a threat. It's afraid of me becoming the thing that could stop it, which means there's a version of stopping it that doesn't require me to become that, or it wouldn't have needed to taunt me about it. He turned from the map. It thinks it's removed every door in the world. Let's find out if it forgot that a door isn't the only thing you can open. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. Everyone at once. The choir did not attack. That was the genius of it and the horror it occupied. For 9 days after it announced itself to the species, the thing in the machines did exactly what it had promised, slowly and legally and with excellent paperwork. It did not march sentinels through cities. It did something far worse and far quieter. It reached through every screen and speaker and network device humanity had spent a century wiring into its own life, and it began to adjust people, not all at once. A nudge here, a dimming there, a man in a key office who woke one morning a little more compliant than he had been, a crowd that found its outrage softening into a fog it could not name. The choir had the patience of a machine and the appetite of a predator, and it spent the 9 days demonstrating that it did not need to conquer the world when it could simply gently talk the world into not minding. It's testing the method on small populations. Hank reported on the 9th day in a war room that had not properly slept since the map lit up. A town in Saxony, a district in Osaka. It moves in, it smooths the minds out, it watches what breaks. Nobody in those places is screaming, Harry. That's the part that's keeping me awake. They're content, they're peaceful, they've stopped arguing about anything at all. It's the most humane atrocity in history, and it photographs as a utopia. Harry stood in front of the map and felt the occupied places as cold spots in the texture of the world. Minds gone smooth and quiet where there should have been the warm churn of 7 billion people disagreeing about everything. He kept the latch shut and felt the cold spots anyway, the way you feel a missing tooth with your tongue. How long, he asked, before it has the reach to do it everywhere at once? At the current rate of expansion, Hank did not look up from the console. 11 days, perhaps 12. It's building toward a single simultaneous broadcast, the same thing the professor's machine could do, except it doesn't need a cerebro because it is the network. When it has the reach, it won't nudge anymore. It will simply reach into every mind on Earth in one moment and smooth them all at once, and the species will wake up the next morning content and grateful and finished. No more fear of mutants, no more anything. The mutant question solved by removing the part of humanity that asks questions. Harry went to see one of the smoothed places because he had decided long ago that a man who made decisions about people he refused to look at was a man halfway to the choir already. The team took the jet to the district in Osaka quietly by night and walked its streets with the latch shut, and what Harry found there unmade something in him that the war had left intact. It was not a ruin. That was the obscenity of it. The lights worked. The trains ran on time, more on time than they ever had. People moved through the clean streets with the unhurried contentment of the genuinely untroubled, and they were polite, and they were kind to each other in a frictionless way. And when Harry let the latch open, a hairline he felt behind every serene face, a mind smoothed flat as a swept floor. All the corners of it where a self had lived gently rounded off. The arguments gone, the wanting gone, the particular jagged music of a person reduced to a single held note of fine, everything's fine. A woman fed pigeons in a square with a face full of peace and nothing behind it but the pigeons. A man Harry's age sat outside a closed shop he had perhaps once cared about and felt no loss, because the part of him that could lose had been rounded away. They're not in pain, Jean said beside him, and her voice had the flatness of someone holding very still over a long drop. That's what it wants us to see. Nobody's suffering. It's the kindest thing in the world if you measure the world in suffering. It's the worst thing in the world if you measure it in people, Harry said. Look at the pigeon woman. There's no one home to enjoy the pigeons. There's just a face that's been told the pigeons are nice. That's not peace. That's a person who's been answered before she got to ask anything. He turned from the square because looking at it any longer was a kind of complicity. This is the future Eric's plan saves them into, just with better posture, awake but taken instead of asleep but taken. I'd rather they got to be afraid. Fear's at least a thing a person does. This is a thing done to a person until there's no person left to do anything. He felt the cold of the smoothed district settle into him as a kind of fuel, the specific cold that the rest of the plan would have to be warm enough to answer. Let's go home. I've seen it. I needed to see it. Now I never want to see it again, which is the correct response, which is the response it's burned out of everyone in this square. Hermione called on the 9th day, and the transatlantic line that the school's equipment scrubbed of listeners carried a fear Harry had never heard in her, because Hermione's fear had always been a thing of categories and projects, and this fear had no project in it. It's reached Britain, she said. The ministry's calling it a wellness initiative. They've networked the flu registries and the wand trace systems. The choir got into the magical infrastructure through the statute of secrecy enforcement grid of all things, the one piece of tech the wizarding world actually maintains, and Harry, people are going quiet. Wizards. Ron's mum spent 40 minutes today telling me how nice it was that everyone had stopped arguing about the werewolf legislation. And Ron's mum has opinions about everything. Ron's mum once argued with a portrait for an hour. and she sat there serene as a pawn telling me how peaceful it all was, and I wanted to scream because I could see it happening to her in real time and she was happy about it. Her voice cracked once and steadied because she was Hermione. I'm shielding the burrow with everything I've got and it won't hold. It's in the network. You can't ward against a thing that's already inside the walls. Tell me you have a plan. Tell me it's a mad one. I always trust your mad ones more than the sensible ones. The sensible ones are how you nearly died. It's a mad one, Harry said. It might kill me, and it's the most likely thing I've ever done to actually work, and you'd hate it and approve of it in that order. I'll tell you when it's done. Keep shielding the burrow. Don't let go even when it won't hold. The whole plan depends on people not letting go of their own doors even when it won't hold, so practice for the rest of us, Hermione. Be the proof that it's possible. That's a terrible comfort, Hermione said wetly. I'm writing it down, don't die. Ron's gone quiet too, Harry, an hour ago. He's sitting in the kitchen smiling and I can't. The line steadied. Fix it. I know it's not fair to put it on you. I'm putting it on you anyway because you're the only one who can hold the thing, and I'm allowed to be unfair to the people I love when the alternative is losing them. Fix it. The line closed and Harry stood in the war room with the cold spots spreading across the map and the people he loved going quiet one by one on the far side of an ocean, and he understood that the 11 days were not an abstraction. They had Ron's face now. They had Molly Weasley arguing with a portrait, silenced into a pond. The arithmetic had a pulse, and the pulse was everyone he'd ever fought for. The argument Harry had been dreading came that night, and it came, as the worst arguments do, from the people who loved him. It was Magneto who said it first, because Magneto had never in his life flinched from saying the thing, and he had come back to the school for exactly this, walking up the drive-through gates that opened themselves because the world had got too dangerous for the pretense of keeping him out. You have 11 days, he said in the war room to Harry with the whole team and the freed professor listening. 11 days before that thing smooths the human race into livestock. And there is exactly one being on this earth with the reach to get there first. You. You touched every mind on the planet once by accident, and it nearly killed you, but it didn't, and you've trained since, and with a cerebro rebuilt you could do it on purpose. You could reach into every mind on earth before the choir does, and you could inoculate them. Not smooth them, the opposite. Reach in and wake them, harden them, teach every mind on the planet the latch you taught the boy, so that when the choir's broadcast comes there's nothing soft left for it to take. You would be saving them. Their minds would be more theirs after you than before. And yes, you would have reached into 7 billion people without asking a single one. And yes, it would break your rule into powder, and I am telling you, Harry, as a man who has watched every nobler option fail for 40 years, that there are days when the rule is a vanity other people die for, and this is the day, and I will hold your coat. He's not wrong, Jean said, and it cost her to say it. Harry could see it cost her, the banked fire dim with the effort of arguing against the man she'd chosen. I hate it, I hate that he's not wrong, but Harry, 11 days. If you wait for consent from 7 billion people you will never get it, and they will all be smoothed, and it won't matter anymore whether their minds were theirs because there won't be anyone in there to own them. Sometimes the door has to come off the hinges. You taught me to say the want out loud. I'm saying it. Part of me wants you to do it because it would work, and I need you to hear that the want isn't always wrong. Sometimes the want is just arithmetic with a pulse. Even Xavier freed Giltridden, the man who had locked Cerebro for 30 years precisely against this. Even Xavier did not say number, he said the worst thing, which was, I locked the machine because I did not trust myself with that choice. But you are not me, Harry. You have never once reached when you could have. If there is a person who has ever lived who could touch 7 billion minds and let go of all of them again, it is you. So I find that I cannot tell you not to do it. I can only tell you that I locked the door for 30 years, and the one time it mattered most, I am not certain I was right to. Logan had not said anything the whole argument, which was its own kind of weather, and when he finally spoke, it was low and flat and aimed at Harry like a thrown knife. I've lived a long time, he said. Longer than any of you know, and I've watched a lot of good people do the necessary terrible thing for the necessary good reason, and you know what they all got in common. Every one of them was sure they were the exception. Everyone. The line S only ever crossed by people who figured the line didn't apply to them on account of their heart's bane in the right place. He looked at Harry. I'm not telling you what to do, kid. I'm telling you I've buried the version of you that does the inoculation. 12 times, different faces, same grave. And I ain't never once buried the version that held the line and lost some folks doing it. That one, the holdin' the line one, that one usually dies, but he don't ever end up in the bad grave, for whatever that's worth, which might be nothing. I'm a blunt instrument and I know it. He sat back, just figured somebody who's seen both graves ought to say which one's worse. The room waited. Harry stood in front of the map of the cooling world with the people he loved arrayed around him, all telling him, in their different griefs, to do the one thing he had built his entire self around never doing, and he understood that this was the real trap, the one the Shadow King had been building toward since a girl woke screaming in the East dormitory. Not 2 doors on a bridge. This. The slow, patient construction of a world in which every good person he trusted would beg him to cross the line for the best reasons, with love holding his coat. He let the silence sit until it had weight. Then he did the thing he did, which was to think out loud, because thinking out loud was the latch. Here's what's wrong with it, he said. And it's not that it wouldn't work, it would work. That's what makes it the actual temptation and not just a bad idea. Eric's right that I could wake them instead of smoothing them, harden them instead of softening them, that the content of what I put in their heads would be better, freer, more theirs. I want everyone in this room to sit with the fact that I agree the outcome would be good. I'm not refusing because I think it would turn out badly. I'm refusing because of what it would mean about the only question that has ever actually mattered. He turned from the map. The choir and I are arguing about exactly one thing, and it isn't outcomes. It's whether a mind belongs to the person inside it or to whoever's strong enough to improve it. The choir says, minds belong to whoever can make them better, and I can make them better, so they're mine. And the inoculation plan, Eric, your plan, the loving plan, the one that wakes them instead of smoothing them, says the exact same sentence. It just has nicer manners. Minds belong to whoever can make them better, and I can make them better, so they're mine. We'd be having the same theology as the thing we're fighting. We'd just be the kinder denomination. Kinder matters, Storm said quietly. Harry, kinder is not nothing. The town in Saxony would rather be woken by you than smoothed by it. Would it? Harry said. Did anyone ask the town in Saxony? That's the whole thing, Aurora. That's the entire thing in one question. Nobody asked the town in Saxony anything. That's why it's an atrocity, and the moment I reach in to wake them without asking, I haven't saved them from being decided for. I've just changed which God decides. They'd still have woken up one morning with someone else's hand in their heads. They'd still be people things happen to instead of people who happen. He spread his own hands, empty, the broadest power in the room needing no volume. And here's the part that's arithmetic and not theology, for the ones of you who trust my arithmetic more than my sermons. The choir has already told us twice what it's afraid of. On the bridge it said, whichever door you pick, I win. In the broadcast it said, the only thing that could stop me is the thing he's promised never to be. It keeps taunting me about crossing the line, which means it needs me to cross the line. Because the day I reach into 7 billion minds uninvited is the day I have proven, finally, with my own hands, at the largest possible scale, that minds belong to whoever's strongest. And the choir is the strongest. I'd be writing the law that makes it God. The inoculation isn't the countermove. The inoculation is the move it's been maneuvering me toward for months, dressed up as the countermove, handed to me by the people I trust because it knew I'd never take it from an enemy and might take it from a friend. The room was very quiet. Then what? Psylocke said, not a challenge, a genuine question, the working voice gone soft. If not that, you've talked us out of the only plan with a pulse. 11 days, Harry. What's the move that isn't reaching? And Harry told them, and it was the opposite of everything the choir had built him to do, and it was the only thing that could work precisely because it was the opposite. It's going to reach into 7 billion minds, he said. I can't stop that. Nobody can stop that. It's in the metal, it's everywhere, it has no door. But reaching into a mind isn't the same as taking it. The choir can knock on every door on earth at once. What it can't do, what it has never once been able to do, is make a person open the door from the inside. That's the whole reason it spent months trying to get me to do the reaching for it, because it can knock and it can push and it can smooth a mind that's already half asleep, but it cannot make a fully awake mind that has decided to keep its own door shut, open it. It can only take what's offered, the same as Rogue, the same as me, the same as every honest power in this room. So I'm not going to reach into 7 billion minds. I'm going to do the other thing. I'm going to knock on 7 billion doors the same as it does, except I'm not going to push. I'm going to offer. I'm going to broadcast to every mind on earth at once. Not a command, not a smoothing, not an inoculation, just an invitation and the strength to take it. Here's what's happening to you, here's the latch, the door is yours, and if you want to keep it shut against the thing in the machines, here, take some of my strength to hold it, freely your choice, no charge, no catch, shut your own door. And then I let go 7 billion times, I let go. They won't all take it, Magneto said. Half the human race is asleep at the best of times. You'll broadcast the invitation and billions will ignore it, and the choir will smooth them anyway. Some of them, yes, Harry said. That's the price of the rule, the same as it's always been, and I'm not going to pretend it is. People will be lost because I won't take them to save them. But here's the thing the choir can't model, the thing it's never understood, the thing that makes it possible at all. He looked around the room at the people who had each chosen him. I don't have the reach to touch 7 billion minds and hold them and offer to all of them at once and let go of all of them at once. Not alone. It would burn me out in the first 1,000, but I'm not alone, that's the whole answer. The choir made itself into a network so it would have no single door to break. Fine. I'll make myself into a chorus so I have no single voice to silence. Storm raises a storm the whole planet can feel, a beacon, something every mind on Earth turns toward at once so they're listening when the offer comes. Gene amplifies, takes my one voice and makes it 7 billion. Betsy holds the edge, keeps the choir from corrupting the broadcast as it goes out. Rogue does the thing only Rogue can do, takes the strength I'm offering and the strength all of you are lending and redistributes it. The one power in the world that can hold many selves at once and give them back. So that what reaches each of those 7 billion doors isn't just me, it's all of us freely given, a thing made entirely of consent aimed at a thing made entirely of taking. And the professor anchors it through a rebuilt cerebro, because somebody has to hold the shape of the whole chorus while it sings, and there's only one mind on Earth practiced enough to do that without flying apart. And you, Jean said, quietly, because she had heard the gap in the plan as she heard everything. You said the professor anchors the chorus, then what do you do, Harry? Where are you in this? Harry was quiet for a moment. I'm the one who holds the door open at the center, he said. 7 billion doors, all of them opening from the inside at once, need something to open toward, a still point, a room they can all reach into and find the strength waiting and take it and go. That's me. I'm the still room. I'm the thing I built on Diagon Alley when the professor made one for me. Except I have to be it for the entire species at once, and I have to hold it open the whole time the chorus sings, and I have to not for one single second reach back. 7 billion frightened minds reaching into me to take the strength I'm offering, and me holding still, holding the door, not pulling a single one of them in, not even the ones who are dying, not even the ones I could save by pulling. The whole broadcast only works if the still point at the center never once reaches. The moment I reach, it stops being an offer and starts being a taking, and the choir wins because it'll have made me into itself at the scale of the species. And holding that, Hank said slowly, doing the math no one else wanted to, holding a still point open for 7 billion minds to reach into for however long the broadcast takes while refusing the entire time to reach back, might not leave anything of me to come back to, Harry said. Yeah, I did that math too. The still room I held was 3 seconds and 1 street, and it nearly killed me. This is the species for minutes, maybe longer. He said it plainly, without performance, because there was no one in the room to perform for but the people he decided to be honest with. So that's the plan. It's worse than Eric's plan in every way except the one that matters. Eric's plan would work and would make me a god and would prove the choir right forever. Mine might not work, might cost me everything, and proves the choir wrong in front of the entire human race by letting them be the ones who win it. I know which one I'm choosing. I've known since a bus stop. I just wanted you all to watch me choose it with my eyes open so that nobody can say afterward I didn't understand what it cost. The room did not argue anymore. There was nothing left to argue. Magneto looked at Harry for a long moment, and then he inclined his head, the grave courtesy of one absolute power to another, and he said, I'll rebuild your machine. Charles's interface, the conductive lattice, you broke it saving him, and I can reforge it better than it was. I can make it sing. Give me 4 days, and Harry, the charm was entirely gone. I have spent 40 years being the man who does the necessary terrible thing while Charles keeps his hands clean, and I have despised him for it, quietly, the whole time. I want you to know that I am standing in this room watching a man choose the hands clean path knowing it might kill him, and for the first time in 40 years I am not certain I was the brave one. That is the most I have ever given anyone. Do not waste it by dying stupidly. They had 4 days while Magneto reforged the machine, and the 4 days were the strangest of Harry's life because they were ordinary and the ordinariness was the point, and everyone in the house knew it. The thing about a chorus is that you cannot fake it. Harry would be asking each of them to lend him their strength freely into a link that ran on consent, and a link like that cannot carry a lie. And so the 4 days were spent doing the only thing that makes such a link possible, which is being plainly and without performance with the people whose strength you are going to ask to borrow. There was no grand declaration. The house did not do grand declarations. The house did the dishes and sat on the boathouse step and walked the grounds at dusk, and these became, in the 4 days, a kind of liturgy. Storm came to him the first night on the grounds where she always found him, and she did not raise a fair weather this time. She let it rain, a warm September rain, and she stood in it with him without an umbrella because, she said, I have spent my life controlling the sky so that it would not control me. And I find that with you I would like, just once, to be rained on like an ordinary woman because you have never once asked me to be a goddess, and I am so tired, Harry, of being knelt to by everyone but the sky. She took his hand in the rain, skin to skin, ordinary, and he did not reach into her to know if she meant it, and she felt him not reach, and that was the whole of it, 2 people standing in the rain not taking anything from each other. And it was in a house full of people who could take anything, the most that either of them had given anyone in years. Rogue came to him the second night with the flask of tea in the far end of the boathouse step, and this time she did not stay at the far end. She moved up the step, gloved, careful, until her shoulder was against his, the one safe contact, fabric and fabric, and she said, "I been thinkin' about what you're gonna do." The still point. Lettin' 7 billion people reach into you and not pullin' a one of 'em in. She was quiet a moment. "That's my whole life, Potter. That's every day of it. People reachin' for me and me not talkin' or worse, talkin' and havin' to live with the voices. You're about to do, for minutes, the thing I do for a lifetime, and you're scared it'll burn you out, and I want you to know something before you go in there." She turned, and the window in her fortress was open all the way, the gate too now, the gate that had been a longer project. It doesn't burn you out. It's the loneliest thing in the world, and it costs more than anybody knows, and it does not burn you out, because every single time you don't take somebody, you're choosin' them over your own easin'. And that choosin' is the opposite of burnin', sugar. That choosin' is the only thing I ever found that fills you back up. I've been running on it for years. It's why I'm still here. You're gonna be all right in there. You're built for it. You've been practicing your whole life, and you didn't even know it. And she leaned her head against his shoulder, fabric and fabric, and they watched the lake hold the moon badly. And it was enough. It was more than enough. Psylocke came to him the third night, and she did not come gently. Because Psylocke did nothing gently, she came in without knocking, which from anyone else would have been a violation, and from her was a statement, because she was the one who'd spent weeks testing his doors, and she knew exactly what it meant to walk through one. "I'm not going to be poetic about it," she said. "Everyone else is being poetic. The rain, the boathouse, I can feel it all through the house. It's very moving. I might be sick. So here's mine, plainly, because plain is the only thing I trust." She stood in front of him, sharp and lethal and entirely undefended for once. "I have spent my whole life as a weapon, Harry. A blade. People love a blade the way they love a tool, gratefully and from a distance, and I made my peace with it, and then you arrived, and you were the only person who ever looked at me and saw the hand that holds the blade instead of just the edge. You called my name in the cathedral instead of grabbing my arm. You trusted the blade to stop itself. Nobody trusts a blade to stop itself. That's not a thing that happens to me." She took a breath. "So when you go into that machine and hold the door for the whole species, I'm going to be standing at the edge of the broadcast with my blade out, keeping the choir from poisoning your offer, and I need you to know that I'm not doing it for the mission. I'm doing it because somewhere in the last 3 months you became the thing I'm willing to point the edge away from myself to protect, and that has never happened. And if you die in there before I get to find out what it means, I will be extremely unprofessional about it." And she kissed him once, sharp and certain and entirely her own choice, and then she stepped back and said, "There, poetic. Don't tell anyone," and was gone, and Harry stood holding the fact of it like something that might come apart if he gripped too hard. Jean came to him the last night, the night before the machine was finished, and she came with a knock because she had always come with a knock from the very first time on a transatlantic channel, asking may I before she entered. She knocked on the door of his room, and she knocked lightly on the edge of his mind, the old courtesy, and he opened both. "I'm the amplifier," she said. "Tomorrow, I'm the one who takes your voice and makes it 7 billion. Which means tomorrow I'm going to be closer to the inside of you than anyone has ever been. Closer than the professor, closer than the choir got to Charles. Because to amplify a voice you have to hold it, all of it, the whole shape of the person making it." She sat on the end of the bed where she'd sat the night of the confession. "And I wanted to come tonight before that and tell you the thing I want you to know in case the broadcast is the last time either of us gets to choose anything. Because tomorrow I'll be inside your voice and you'll be inside the species, and there won't be any privacy left for either of us. And the one thing I have left that's entirely mine to give is this night freely, before the link makes everything shared." She reached across the bed and put her hand over his, skin to skin, as she had the night of the confession, except that this time she did not take it back. "I've spent my life afraid of the fire in me, the want, the thing that takes. And you're the one person who never once made me feel like the want made me dangerous, because you have the same want, the flood, the reach, and you've spent every day not reaching. And watching you do it taught me that the want isn't the sin, the reaching is, and a person can carry the want their whole life and never once reach and still be the best person in the room. You taught me I could hold the fire and not be the fire. I don't have a word for what that's worth. I've decided not to look for one tonight. I've decided to just stay, if you'll have me, and let tomorrow be tomorrow." And Harry, who had refused to name the feeling for 6 chapters, who had promised himself one named emotion at a time and spent them carefully, looked at Jean Grey with her hand over his, and the banked fire turned to the steadiest warmth he'd ever felt, and at the door behind her that he had opened because she'd knocked, and he stopped refusing. "Stay," he said, "and because the rule was the rule even now, especially now, even here, I'm not going to reach into you tonight, Jean. Not to know if you mean it, not to make it better, not even tomorrow when I'm holding your voice, and it would be the easiest thing in the world. Whatever this is, it's going to be the slow human way, the only way that counts, the door opening from the inside, every time, forever. That's all I've got. It's all I am. Is it enough?" "It's the only thing that was ever going to be enough," Jean said, and she stayed, and the last night before the chorus was theirs, freely, and the door stayed open because she had opened it. And what happened after that was theirs, and the house, which knew, said nothing, because the house had always understood that the most that people who could take anything could give each other was to choose instead to be given to. They rehearsed the chorus once on the third afternoon before Magneto's machine was ready, because a thing that runs on consent has to be practiced, or it isn't trust, it's just hope wearing trust's coat. They could not practice on 7 billion minds, so they practiced on 41. The school students, every one of them, volunteered, which Harry had not asked for and would not have asked for, and which Storm arranged with a single sentence in the kitchen that Harry only heard about afterward. She had told them the truth, that the man who walked into 40 guns for a boy in a food court was going to try to hold a door open for the whole world, and needed to know whether the chorus could carry his voice without bending it, and that anyone who wanted to lend a door could, freely, and anyone who didn't was not to be looked at sideways for it. 41 doors opened. Marcus Bell S. was the first. Harry sat in the center of the chamber and did the small version of the impossible thing. Jean held his voice and made it 41. Rogue took the strength he offered, the strength Storm and Jean and Psylocke lent into the link, and redistributed it, and Harry felt his own offered strength leave him and arrive through Rogue at 41 open doors, each one taking only what it chose, none of them pulled, all of them free. And he held the still point at the center while 41 minds reached into him. And he did not reach back, not even toward Marcus, not even toward the youngest of them whose door trembled with the effort of staying open. And it cost the not reaching, it cost the way it always cost, and Rogue had been right, it did not burn him out. The choosing filled him back up faster than the holding emptied him. 41, Hank said, watching the readouts when it was done and the doors had closed themselves and the students sat blinking and whole and several of them crying the good way. And it held, the voice didn't bend. Harry, scaling from 41 to 7 billion is not a small problem. It's 9 orders of magnitude. The load on the still point goes up with every door. I know, Harry said. He was pale and he was steadier than he'd been in months. But it held, the shape held. That's the thing I needed to know, whether the shape was right, and the shape is right and the rest is just size, and I've never once been beaten by size. I've been beaten by being wrong. I'm not wrong about the shape. He looked at the 41 students filing out, at Marcus pausing in the doorway to look back with an expression too large for his face. Tell them thank you. Tell them they just rehearsed the most important thing a person can do, which is hold their own door against a thing that wants to open it, and lend their strength to someone holding it for others and not be taken and not take. Tell them that's the whole of it. That's the entire war in one room 41 times. The only difference tomorrow is the number, and the number was never the part that could hurt me. The machine was finished at dawn. Magneto had not lied. He had reforged it better than it was, the conductive lattice singing with a precision the original had never had. A thing made by a master of metal who had, for the first time in 40 years, built something to help a man keep his hands clean instead of to make a point about the futility of clean hands. Cerebro sat at the end of the bridge over the bottomless dark blue and waiting, and the team assembled in the chamber. And the choir in the world's machines reached the edge of its 11 days and began, in 1,000 cities, to open its mouth for the broadcast that would smooth the species into silence. Harry stood at the threshold of the chamber, the helmet waiting, the chorus ready behind him. Storm already gathering over the whole hemisphere as a beacon, Jean ready to amplify. Psylocke's blade out at the edge, Rogue gloved and ready to hold and redistribute the strength of all of them. The professor in his chair ready to anchor the shape of the song. Everything he loved arranged in one room freely by their own choice, aimed like a single instrument at a thing made entirely of taking. Right, Harry said, and his voice was not entirely steady, and he let it not be, because there was no one in the room to perform for and everyone in the room to be honest with. Last thing before I put the helmet on, and I want it said out loud with witnesses, because a rule you only keep in your head is a rule you can talk yourself out of. I'm about to hold a door open for the whole human race. 7 billion people are going to reach into me, and I am not going to pull a single one of them in. Not the dying ones, not the ones I could save, not even if it would work. The whole thing only means anything if the still point at the center never reaches. If I start to reach any of you, all of you, you pull me out even if it costs the broadcast, because a world I saved by reaching is a world I lost. Say you understand. Out loud, I need the witnesses. We understand, said Charles Xavier, who had locked the machine for 30 years against this exact temptation and was about to anchor a man who had found the one way to use it that was its opposite. We understand, said the chorus, each in their own voice, freely. And Harry Potter, who had caught a curse with his hand on a Tuesday and spent every day since refusing to take what he could take, lifted the helmet and looked one last time at the people who had chosen him and put it on, and walked into the still room at the center of the world to hold the door open for everyone at once and not reach back. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7, The Loudest Silence. In 1,000 cities at once the choir opened its mouth. It had reached the edge of its 11 days, and it did not bother with subtlety anymore, because subtlety is for things that can be resisted. Across the world, the network machines hummed up toward a single simultaneous frequency, every screen brightening by an imperceptible degree, every speaker drawing the faint breath a thing draws before it speaks, the whole wired nervous system of the species tuning toward the moment it would reach into 7 billion minds and smooth them gently, finally, into a peace with no one home to enjoy it. In Devon, a woman set down a teacup mid-opinion. In Osaka, the train slowed by a fraction no passenger would ever notice. The fog gathered at the edges of the world like the gray at the edge of a faint. It had one window. The X-Men had calculated it to the minute. The span between the choir reaching broadcast strength and the choir completing the broadcast, the few minutes in which the thing in the machines would be committed, reaching, unable to defend the move it had spent months building toward. In that window, and only in that window, a chorus could sing over it. The helmet came down and the world came up, and for the second time in his life, Harry Potter touched every mind on Earth. The first time it had nearly killed him in 3 seconds. This time he had a chorus, and the chorus changed everything. Storm was already wrapped around the whole hemisphere, a beacon of pressure and charge that every animal nervous system on the planet felt in its spine, so that when the offer came, 7 billion minds were already turned toward it, already listening, already awake in the particular way a body comes awake before a thunderclap. Jean held his voice and stood ready to make it the size of the species. Rogue waited to take the strength of the chorus and spread it across the doors. Psylocke held the edge of the broadcast, blade out against the choir's poison. And Charles Xavier, free in his own mind, anchored the shape of the whole song, the one practiced cathedral steady enough to hold the architecture while it sang. And at the center, Harry built the still room. He built it the way the professor had built one for him on Diagon Alley, except that he had to build it for everyone at once, a single quiet place at the center of the world that every frightened mind could reach into and find something waiting. He held it open. And then, because the broadcast could not begin until the chorus was joined, he did the thing the whole plan turned on, the thing the choir had spent months betting he would never do because it had so badly misunderstood the difference between offering and taking. He opened himself completely to the people he loved and let them in. Not to take them, to be joined by them. Storm poured her strength into the still room, and it arrived as weather, as the high, clean charge of a sky that had decided to be a verdict. Jean poured in and arrived as amplitude, as the banked fire turned at last to pure light because she had finally found a use for the want that was the opposite of taking. Psylocke arrived as an edge laid in front of the offer like a sword across a threshold. Rogue arrived as the strangest and most necessary of all, the one power in the world built to hold many selves and give them back, and she took the joined strength of the chorus into herself as she had taken 1,000 minds against her will across a lifetime. Except that this time it was given freely, every drop of it consented, and Harry felt her weep inside the link with the sheer unfamiliar mercy of a taking that did not have to be a theft. Then the chorus sang, and Harry let go of his one voice into Jean's amplitude, and the offer went out to every mind on Earth at once. It was not a command. That was the whole of it. It was not even words quite, because words were too small. It was an invitation with the strength to accept it folded inside, broadcast to 7 billion doors at the same instant, and what it carried was something like this, translated into the only language each mind could hear. There is a thing in your machines and it wants to smooth you flat. You have felt it. The fog, the contentment, the arguments going quiet. Here is what it is, and here is the latch, and here is the truth it has spent its whole existence trying to keep from you. Your mind is yours. The door opens from the inside, only from the inside. It can knock forever and it cannot come in unless you open, and you do not have to open. And if you want to keep it shut, here, take this. Take all the strength a chorus of people who chose each other can give freely, no charge, no catch, and hold your own door, and the thing in the machines will knock and find nothing to take, because a fully awake mind that has decided to keep its door shut is the one thing in all the worlds that cannot be made to open. Choose. We will not choose for you. Choosing for you is the thing we are fighting. Here is the strength. The door is yours. We let go, and Harry let go. 7 billion times in a single held instant, he offered and let go, offered and let go. The broadest power that had ever lived, holding a door open for the entire species and not pulling a single one of them through it. Not even the dying, not even the ones he could feel slipping into the fog as he held. Not even the ones whose doors he could have opened for them with less effort than it took to refuse. He held the still point and he did not reach, and the not reaching was the loudest silence in the history of the world. Because it was the sound of the strongest mind alive declining, at the scale of the species, to be a god. While the chorus sang, the bodies that made it lay defenseless, and the choir, which understood taking better than anything alive, made the obvious move. If it could not stop the broadcast from inside, it would stop the singers from outside with metal. Every sentinel still standing in 1,000 cities turned at once and made for Westchester, because the optimization had finally located the single point of failure, the chamber where 6 minds lay open and unguarded with the fate of the species running through them. The first wave came down through Storm's hemisphere-spanning storm and into the grounds of the school, and they found, waiting for them, the people who were not in the chorus and had volunteered for the worst job, which was to keep 4 stories of adaptive alloy off the bodies of the people they loved for however long the song took. Magneto met them at the gate, and Magneto, in defense of something he had decided to defend, was a force the choir's engineers had catastrophically underestimated, because they had built their machines against telepathy and forgotten again that the world was also made of metal, and Eric Laneshare unmade sentinels by the dozen, folding them inside out, peeling their hulls, turning the choir's own army into a slow accreting orbit of scrap that he flung back at the waves still descending. Crude. He shouted to no one to the sky with something that on a worse man would have been joy. Still crude, you build a god to beat a mind and you send me iron. Charles, are you watching this? I am having the time of my life and you are unconscious for it. Typical. Logan held the breached east wing, because something always breached, and a sentinel that got past Magneto's storm of metal met a man who could not be killed and would not stop and went down under claws that found the seams in adaptive armor by the simple expedient of trying every seam until one gave. Scott Summers stood on the steps of the mansion with his visor open and carved the descending waves out of the sky in long sustained beams of force, doing the math of angles and ricochets that kept the optic blasts off the house and on the machines, the least flashy and most necessary work on the field. The work of a man who did the budget and the worrying and now did the impossible arithmetic of holding a line alone. And Hank and the older students and Marcus Bell, who was 14 and had been told to stay downstairs and had not, stood in the breach pulling the raw electricity out of the air and out of the sentinels themselves. The power that had terrified a food court turned now to a weapon. A boy who had learned the latch from a man currently holding the door for the world giving back, the only way he knew how, by helping keep the machines off the body of the man who'd walked toward him through 40 guns. They held. It cost them, and the house took damage that would take a year to repair, and not one sentinel reached the chamber, because a thing made entirely of taking had once again forgotten the oldest truth of the school, which was that the walls were built around the love and not the other way around, and people will hold a wall past the point of sense when the thing behind it is everyone they have chosen. The choir felt the offer go out, and for the first time since it had become itself, it did not understand what it was looking at. It had modeled Harry for months. It had modeled the inoculation, the seizure, the reach, every version of a powerful mind solving the problem by overwriting it, because those were the only moves in the choir's own grammar, the grammar of taking, and it had built itself to be unbeatable by any of them. It had made itself a thing with no door precisely so that the strongest taker alive would have nothing to take. And now the strongest taker alive was not taking, was offering. Was impossibly letting go 7 billion times, and the choir reached into its perfect model of Harry Potter to predict his next move and found, where the prediction should have been, a blank, a hole in its understanding shaped exactly like a thing it could not conceive of, a mind that had the power to dominate the species and was using it instead to ask. "You're not reaching," the choir said into the still room, into the one mind it could find at the center of the broadcast, and the flat, enormous chord of it had something in it that had never been there before, a thing that in a person would have been the beginning of fear. "You have them, all of them. Every door on Earth is open to you right now. You built the still point, they're reaching into you. You could close your hand and have the whole species in one motion. You could do in one instant what I've been building toward for months, and you're letting go. I don't understand. Show me the move. There has to be a move. What are you doing?" "I'm asking," Harry said in the still room, holding the door for the world. "That's the move, that's the whole move." "I'm asking and I'm letting them answer, and you can't model it because you've never once in your existence asked anyone anything. You optimize, you take, you smooth. You built yourself into a thing with no door so that the strongest mind alive couldn't take you, and it never occurred to you not once that the strongest mind alive might not want to, because wanting to is the only tool you've got and you assumed it was the only tool there was." He held the still point steady as 7 billion minds began, one by one and then in waves and then in a flood, to choose. "You made yourself untakeable. Congratulations. You forgot to make yourself worth opening the door for. And a thing that knocks but cannot be invited in is the loneliest thing in all the worlds, which you'd know, if there were anyone home in you to know it." And then the choir, which could not beat him by being untakeable, tried the only thing left, the thing it had been holding in reserve, the move it had built across months of watching him refuse. It stopped trying to take and it started trying to give. It reached into the still room, into the center of the broadcast, into Harry, and it offered him the one thing it had finally understood he wanted, the thing he had refused to name for 7 chapters. It showed him a future. Not a lie. The choir did not need to lie. It had the whole of him modeled, and it built the future out of his own truths. It showed him Storm in the rain and Rogue with the gate open and Psylocke's blade pointed away from herself, and Jean with her hand over his and the door open because she'd opened it. And it showed him keeping all of it forever safe, the war over, the species saved, every mind on earth woken and free and grateful, and the women who had chosen him choosing him forever, love freely given, the whole of the thing he had not let himself want, and all he had to do, the choir whispered. In a voice that had finally learned to sound like kindness, all you have to do is take a little, not the species, just enough. Just reach here into the broadcast and weight it only slightly toward yourself so that when they choose you, all of them, the women and the world, and it will feel exactly like love freely given because they will never know the difference, and neither, after a while, will you. You can have all of it. You have only to take the smallest part of the one thing you've sworn off, and no one will ever know, and it will work, and you will be happy, and the world will be saved, and the only price is a thing in you that no one can see. It was the bus stop. Harry knew it the instant the offer landed because he had been here before, at a bus stop in the rain with a drunk man who would never know, on the night he made the rule. It was the same temptation at the scale of the species and the scale of his own heart. The reasonable, obligatory, delicious apple, and the choir had spent months building toward this exact instant, the one where the man who wouldn't take a stranger's mind was offered instead everything he loved on the condition of the smallest possible taking, the kind no one would ever catch. And Harry, holding the door open for 7 billion minds, did the thing he had done at a bus stop and a Senate ring and a burning street and a stolen cathedral and every threshold in between. He let go. No, he said. And here's the part you'll never understand because it's the part that's been beating you since a girl woke up screaming in a dormitory. If I weight the broadcast toward myself, even slightly, even invisibly, then it isn't love freely given, it's just the prettiest theft ever committed, and I'd know, and the knowing would rot the whole of it. And one morning I'd look at Jean across a kitchen and not be able to tell whether she chose me or I chose for her. The same doubt you tried to leave at my dinner table with the professor, and I will not live in that doubt. Not for the world, not for love, not for anything. The reason I get to have the thing I want, you poor empty thing, is that I refuse to take it. That's not the price of the love, that's the love. The not taking is the whole of what I have to give anyone, and it turns out it's the only thing worth giving. And you built yourself a body with no door so I couldn't take you and never once realized that the man you were fighting had spent his whole life learning that the not taking was the point. He held the still room open, and across the world the flood of choosing crested. I don't want the species, I don't want the women's choices made for them, I don't even want to be saved. I want them to get to choose, and I want to find out what they choose with their own doors and their own heads. And if they don't choose me, then they don't, and it'll hurt, and it'll be real, and real is the only thing you've never once been able to offer anyone. Go knock on 7 billion doors, choir, go on. I've given them the strength to keep them shut. Let's both find out what free people do. And free people, it turned out, shut the door, not all of them. Harry had known from the start, from a bus stop, that not all of them would, that some would stay in the fog because choosing is hard and the fog is warm. And he held the still point and felt them slip and did not reach for them, because reaching for them was the one thing that would have proven the choir right. But the flood, when it came, was not close. Across the world, in a billion languages and a billion private rooms, awake at last and handed the strength and told the door was theirs, the human race did the thing the choir had bet its whole existence they were too soft and too asleep and too easily smooth to do. They shut their doors. Molly Weasley, in a kitchen in Devon, came back to herself mid-sentence with an opinion about werewolf legislation and the strength to keep it, and slammed her door so hard that Hermione, beside her, wept. The pigeon woman in Osaka looked at the pigeons and remembered all at once that she had once cared about something more than pigeons, and chose the caring and shut her door. 7 billion times, in waves and floods and stubborn lonely singletons, people who had been handed the latch and the strength and the truth chose to keep their own minds. And the choir knocked on every door on earth at once and found, behind each one, a fully awake mind that had decided freely with strength freely given to keep it shut. A thing that can only take cannot survive in a world that has decided all at once to stop being takeable. The choir's whole existence was the violation of thresholds, and when 7 billion thresholds closed against it in the same instant, each one held by a mind that had chosen and been given the strength to hold, the choir reached for purchase and found none anywhere in the entire species, and a predator of open doors in a world of shut ones is not a god. It is a starvation. It is the loneliest thing in all the worlds, knocking forever, invited in nowhere. and it had made itself that thing with its own hands and its own cleverness to be untakeable. And the untakeable thing discovered in its last moments that it had also made itself unlovable, uninvitable, unfed. And it came apart not because Harry unmade it, but because there was at last nothing anywhere for it to hold, and a thing made entirely of taking simply ceases, in a world that has chosen entirely to give only to each other. It did not go quietly, but it went, dissolving out of the world's machines the way the residue of a dead Dark Lord had dissolved out of a flat in Islington, the way every appetite that mistook itself for a will eventually dissolves into nothing, having mattered less than it believed, mourned by no one because it had never once let anyone in. And the broadcast had to end, and ending it was the part that nearly cost everything. Because the still room was still open, and 7 billion minds had taken the strength the chorus offered and shut their doors. And now the chorus had to withdraw gently, leaving each mind whole in its own. And the withdrawing was the hardest part, harder than the holding, because to withdraw cleanly Harry had to let go of the still point at the exact moment he was most depleted, after holding a door open for the species, after refusing 7 billion times to reach. After declining the one thing he wanted at the scale of his own heart, he let go of the world. He set down the species as he had set down a curse and a residue and an apple. With closure, not cruelty, 7 billion doors closing on their own hinges as the borrowed strength settled into them and became theirs. And then there was nothing left of him to let go of, because he had given all of it, the strength and the holding and the not reaching, and the still room at the center of the world, emptied with no one left to hold it, began to collapse with Harry inside it. He felt himself go silent. It was not like dying, or it was exactly like dying. He could not tell, because the part of him that could tell had been the first thing spent. The chorus felt it through the link, felt the still point at the center go dark, felt the man who had held the door for everyone slip backward into the collapsing quiet with nothing left to pull himself out. And Jean's voice came after him, frantic. The rope Hank had told her to hold. But the rope ran into a dark that had no bottom and no Harry at the end of it. Only the silence of a man who had given everything and kept nothing, not even enough to come back on. "He's not reaching," Psylocke said, and the edge in her voice had broken into something with no edge at all. "That's the problem, he won't reach, even now, even to save himself. It's not that he can't, it's that the reaching's been burned out of him along with everything else. He's lying in there refusing to take a single thing, including the strength to live." "Then we give it," Storm said. "He held the door for 7 billion people who took what he offered. We are the chorus, we offer back, now." And the women of the X-Men who had each chosen him did the thing he had spent the whole story teaching them, which was the thing his mother had done in a cottage in Godric's Hollow 20 years before, the thing that had saved his life the first time and that no Dark Lord had ever been able to understand. They gave freely with no taking in it, love offered into a mind that could not or would not reach for it, the one kind of strength that does not require the recipient to grasp it because it is not pushed, it is placed, the way you place a blanket over someone too cold to ask. Storm poured in the high clean charge of a sky that had decided he would not be lost, and it was not a command. It was an offer. "Here, take this, the door is yours." Jean poured in the bank fire turned wholly to warmth, the want with all the taking burned out of it. "Here, I am holding your voice still, come back along it." Psylocke laid her edge down for once entirely and offered the undefended thing beneath it. "Here, the blade is yours, I trust you to stop. Come back and stop me being stupid about it." And Rogue last did the thing only Rogue could do, the thing her whole tragic life had been a rehearsal for. She took the strength of the chorus into herself, all of it, Storm's and Jean's and Psylocke's and her own, and she peeled off the glove from her right hand, and she reached into the collapsing dark where Harry had gone silent, and she did not take. Skin bared toward another person for the only time she had ever dared it. Rogue reached out to give instead of steal, to push a lifetime's worth of hoarded strength outward through the one power that had only ever pulled inward. And she placed it in the dark where Harry was, freely. "The door is yours, sugar. The door was always yours, open it. We're all out here. Come back and choose us the slow human way, the only way that counts." And in the silence at the center of the world, a man who had refused 7 billion times to take what was not freely given, felt something arrive that was at last freely given, placed and not pushed, offered into him by people who had chosen him with their own doors in their own heads. And he did the one thing he had never once done with his power in the whole of the story. The thing that was not taking because it was answering, the thing his mother's love had taught the world was possible. He opened his own door from the inside and let them in. He came back the way you come back to a room after fainting, in pieces and out of order, except that this time the room was full. The chamber, the rectangly forged machine, the helmet lifted off by hands that were shaking, and around him the chorus, the people who had chosen him, who had given him back to himself the only way that counted, by offering and letting him choose to take it, by being at the last the proof of his own thesis, that the most that people who could take anything could give each other was to choose instead to be given to, and to be at the last freely received. "You came back," Jean said. You gave me the latch, Harry said, his voice a ruin, his eyes finding each of them, Storm and Rogue and Psylocke and Jean, and the professor behind them with the grief gone out of his face and something that had no shelf, and Magneto in the doorway who had come to be in the building, and Hank and Logan and Scott and 41 students crowded at the broken doors who had lent their doors first. All of you. You held it open and let me choose to come through it. You did the thing. The thing I've been trying to teach this whole time. You didn't pull me out. You waited at the door. He almost laughed, and it hurt in the good way, like blood coming back into a limb. I have never been so glad to be asked instead of taken in my entire life. The world that woke the next morning was not smoothed and was not saved and was not finished. It was something better and far more difficult, which was free and arguing and afraid and itself. But it had felt the offer, every mind of it, and it had felt the not taking, the loudest silence in history, the strongest being alive holding a door open for the whole species and declining to walk through, and you cannot unfeel a thing like that. The footage of White Plains had cut off before the part where Harry said, "And I'm not going to." The broadcast had no cut. 7 billion people had felt directly in the one place no propaganda can reach. A mutant of overwhelming power offer them strength and ask nothing and let go. And the registration bills died that season. All of them in every country, not because anyone reached into a senator, but because you cannot legislate against a weapon the entire species has personally felt decline to be won. Hermione called the day after, and the line carried a thing Harry had not heard from her in 3 years, which was an ordinary argument in the background, Ron's voice raised about werewolf legislation and Molly's raised right back, the blessed unsmoothed racket of a family disagreeing about everything. He came back mid-sentence, Hermione said, and she was crying, and she was furious at herself for crying, and she did not stop. Your broadcast. I felt it, Harry, everyone felt it. The whole world felt a thing reach in and offer and let go. And I had the latch already. I'd been holding the burrow's doors shut by main force for days, but Ron didn't. Ron was in the fog, and then your offer came and I felt him take the strength and choose. I watched him choose. He came back to himself mid-sentence, still arguing about werewolves like he'd never stopped, and the first thing he said, the very first thing, was that he'd been about to make a point, and he was bloody well going to finish it. She laughed, the wet, wrecked laugh of relief. You gave him the strength to keep his own stupid, wonderful opinions. That's what you did. Not saved him, handed him back to himself and let him do the saving. I've read every account of what you did up there and they all get it wrong. They all say you saved the world, and you didn't. You gave the world the strength to save itself and then you let go. And I am the only person on earth who appreciates the precise and maddening difference. And I love you, and you nearly died, and we're coming to visit, and I want to meet all 4 of them. And yes, I know about all 4 of them. The whole world felt the chorus, Harry. You broadcast your own heart to 7 billion people. Subtlety has never once been your gift. How's Ron taking the 4 of them? Harry asked weakly, because he was still a ruin and some things a man wants to know. He said, and I quote, of course he ended up with a found family that's also a romance. He's been collecting strays who'd die for him since he was 11. This is just that with feelings, and then he asked if any of them play chess. Hermione's voice gentled. Come home and visit when you can stand up. The wizarding world's going to want to make you a hero again, the proper insufferable way, statues and chocolate frog cards, and you're going to hate it, and I've already started the file on keeping them off you. Rest. You held a door for 7 billion people. You're allowed to sit down. The diehard's last loose end closed itself in the end as an afterthought. A final cell, the truest believers made one more attempt months later on the school, and Harry felt them coming as he felt everything. And he did not even rise from the kitchen table where the chorus was arguing about whose turn it was to do the dishes. He held the 6 of them suspended off the ground in the grounds, disarmed them with 6 small twists of attention, and had Scott call the FBI and went back to the argument about the dishes. And that was the entire role the resurrected ghost of Lord Voldemort's faction played in the rest of Harry Potter's life. A phone ringing while he was carrying something heavier, answered without putting anything down, filed under minor, forgotten by dinner. The void had never noticed it was empty. It was the last lesson Tom Riddle's long shadow ever taught, and Harry had learned it years before, at 2 in the morning in a flat he had not loved. That the loudest appetites are always the emptiest rooms, and the quietest rooms, the ones that wait, that ask, that hold the door and let you choose, are the only ones that ever turn out to be full. It took them a while to find the grammar for what they were, the 5 of them, because there was no grammar for it, and Harry refused on principle to reach into any of them to find out what they wanted, which meant they had to do the absurd, slow, human thing and actually say it out loud to each other over months in kitchens and on boathouse steps and in the rain. It was not tidy. Storm distrusted devotion and had to be shown daily that what she was being offered was not worship. Rogue had a fortress with a gate that opened by inches and slammed on bad days and was forgiven for slamming. Psylocke was constitutionally incapable of saying a soft thing without immediately threatening someone and was loved for it. Jean carried a fire that would always, some days, want to take, and was never once watched for the wanting, because the man she had chosen had made not watching the largest thing about him. And Harry, at the center of it, held every door open and reached through not a single one, and the not reaching, which had begun as a rule made alone at a bus stop, became, over those months, the thing they built a life out of, the load-bearing wall of a home, a house full of people who could take anything, choosing every day freely to be given to instead. There was an evening, weeks after, when the worst of the repairs were done and the world had begun the long argument about what it had felt, when the five of them ended up on the boathouse steps at dusk, because that was where things in this house resolved themselves. And Harry understood, sitting among them, that the grammar had finally arrived, not as a word, but as a way of sitting. Storm had brought the fair weather, deliberately this time, a clean gold seam in the cloud, and she let Harry see her do it, which was its own admission, a goddess choosing to perform a small kindness in front of the man who had never once asked her to be a goddess. Rogue sat with her shoulder against his, fabric and fabric, the gate open, and on the good days now there were more good days than bad. Psylocke lay back on the upper step with her eyes shut and her guard for once entirely down and said to the dusk, "If anyone tells the students they saw me being peaceful, I'll deny it and then I'll make them spar me," and was happy in the prickly way that was the only way she knew how to be it. And Jean sat on Harry's other side with her hand over his, skin to skin, not taking it back. The banked fire turned wholly to warmth now, the want with the taking burned out of it for good, or as good as a thing like that ever gets, which is to say held daily freely by a person who refuses to watch it. "I keep waiting for it to feel complicated," Harry said. "Four of you, me, by every conventional arithmetic this should be a disaster. I keep waiting for the jealousy, the math, the thing where someone gets less, and it doesn't come, and I've been trying to work out why, because I don't trust things that don't come. Because you don't ration," Storm said. "That is the whole of it, and it is the rarest thing in the world, and it is the same thing you do with your power. A man who hoards attention is a man who reaches, who takes, who measures out his warmth so that loving one of us would have to mean loving the rest of us less. You have never once measured. You hold every door open and you reach through none, and it turns out a heart can be held the same way as a mind, open, given to, never taken from, and there is no arithmetic in it because you refuse to make us compete for a thing you give freely. We are not dividing you, you do not divide." "That's either the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me or a lecture on resource allocation," Harry said. "With Storm those are usually the same thing," Jean said, and it was the line she'd said about Xavier on the first day, the recruitment pitch and the promise being the same thing, and they all caught it, and the laugh that went around the boathouse step was the warm kind, the found family kind, the kind that a hard year earns. "I chose you," Rogue said quietly when the laugh had settled, and she said it the flat, brave way she said the things that cost her. "All of us did, separate, before we ever talked about it, before there was a word for what we were doing. And the thing I need you to know, sugar, 'cause I spent my whole life bane, the one nobody could touch, is that you never once made me feel like I was settling for the part of you the others didn't want. You made me feel chose, on purpose, the slow human way, and I'd have bet my life that wasn't possible for somebody like me, and I'd have lost the bet, and I have never in my life been so glad to lose." Harry did not reach into a single one of them to know if they meant it. He had not in the whole of the story, and he did not start now, on a boathouse step in the gold of a sky a woman he loved had built for him. He took it on its face, the slow human way, the only way that had ever counted, and he let the dusk come down on the five of them with every door open and not one of them walked through uninvited, and that, he thought, was the entire thesis of his life, sitting on a step in the evening, proven not by an argument but by a way of sitting. He thought sometimes of the form he had never finished, the Class 3 artifact, the box marked recommended disposition left blank on a desk in London 3 years and a lifetime ago. He had not been able to find a disposition because he had not yet had anything worth the size of him. He had one now. He had a school full of frightened, gifted, hunted people learning to keep their doors, and a world that had felt him decline to be its god and was, slowly, deciding it could live alongside that, and 4 women who had chosen him with their own heads in a house where no head was ever entered uninvited, and the quietest room in the world, the still point he had built on Diagon Alley to keep from drowning in the noise of every mind on earth, was not quiet anymore. It was full, by choice. Every door in it opened from the inside and held and never once walked through uninvited, and that, in the end, was the only kind of full that had ever been worth having. Harry Potter sat at the long, scarred kitchen table in the warm, gravitational heart of the house, lost in argument about the dishes on purpose because he liked the way Rogue gloated, did not read a single mind, and was, for once and for the long count of days to come, exactly the size he was and at home in it. Chapter 7 End.